So after 6 years, we finally have a full sequel to Half-Life, Half-Life 2. Even with the delay from the year before, I was still really excited to play this game. I mean, how could I not be? After facing complications with a leak from 2003, the game finally released on the 16th of November 2004, just a few months ago. Everyone who has played it so far has loved it, and the game has received many Game of the Year awards. But how good is the sequel to one of the most iconic and revolutionary video games of the past decade? Did it innovate just like the first? Is the gameplay an improvement? And how did the story fare? Well, to answer all of those, I'm gonna have to dig deep with my crowbar and find the answer. Half-Life 2 starts off with the mysterious suited man from the first game, known as the G-Man, waking Gordon up.
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. Not that I wish to imply you have been sleeping on the job. No one is more deserving of a rest, and all the effort in the world would have gone to waste until, well, let's just say your hour has come again.
So we are playing as Gordon Freeman from the first game. One thing that is already apparent from the opening cutscene is the amazing facial animations on the character models. This is something that persists throughout the entire game, and it really helps add life into the character and some subtle details with them. It's great storytelling overall. The player is then dropped on a train with some passengers talking about being transferred. Gordon then steps outside the train to be greeted by a security bot and a screen showing the antagonist, Dr. Breen, on a monitor.
Welcome. Welcome to City 17. You have chosen, or been chosen, to relocate to one of our finest remaining urban centers.
On your left is a civil protection unit bullying one of the citizens and throwing his luggage over the side, and on your right is a Vortigaunt being forced to do cleanup duty. Continuing further, we see a woman waiting for her husband.
Overwatch stopped our train in the woods and took my husband for questioning. They said he'd be on the next train. I'm not sure when that was. They're being nice, though, letting me wait for him.
Welcome.
We also get to see others nervously sitting around tables and citizens of City 17 being transferred through terminals. This is a fucking brilliant opening. The game has done a great job establishing the dystopia that is City 17, all with very little dialogue. It's a great example of show don't tell. You already have a sense of what civil protection is like to citizens by the way they bully them. You also get a good sense of what life is like for the civilians. They have barely anything left and are being separated from their families. You get a sense of how widespread and powerful the Combine has become by the fact that they have been able to enslave Vortigaunts, the enemies from the first game, and also what the antagonist of the game is like. He tries to make City 17 seem like a happy place and is so full of himself. So much has already been established by showing and not telling, and we're barely 3 minutes into the game. I also love the use of G-Man for this opening, and the whole game in fact. We can see why he has woken us from stasis as the Combine have ruled over Earth for the past 2 decades now. Now the reason why the G-Man wants us to do this is quite vague. I mean, he's a very mysterious character, but we don't know what he wants us to do. Plus, even if we don't know his reason as to why, we know our reason as to why. We want to take Earth back. Gordon then heads for a checkpoint as a civil protection officer takes you in, but...
About that beer I owed you. It's me, Gordon, Barney from Black Mesa.
It's actually Barney Calhoun, the security guard from the first game. He was also the protagonist of Half-Life Blue Shift, which is weird because he makes the beer reference to Gordon here, but Gordon never met him during the events of the first game. So I guess Blue Shift isn't canon? Oh well. Barney then makes a call to Dr. Kleiner, who you may remember as the glasses scientist from the first Half-Life.
Yes, Barney, what is it? I'm in the middle of a critical test.
Sorry, Doc, but look who's here.
Great Scott! Gordon Freeman! I expected more warning.
Yeah, you and me both, Doc. He was about to board the express to Nova Prospect.
So the game is wasting no time getting the plot started, and each line of dialogue from the characters either adds to their character or develops the plot, or both. There's no unnecessary filler going on, which I do appreciate. The player is then given the simple objective of making their way to Kleiner's lab. This gives you a great chance to explore and get a good look at City 17. There is this CPU unit which then tells you to pick up a can and put it in the trash, but you can also throw it at him. This introduces the physics mechanics of the game in a way that feels natural, as the CP units were already established to be bullish towards citizens. The citizens of City 17 also have to wait in line for food, and also talk about how the food is pretty bad, and how they would join civil protection just to get a decent meal. It kind of adds perspective to civil protection, as the people who join it might just want to join it for a decent lifestyle. I mean, they are obviously mean to others, but deep down, it might just be a way for them to deal with the situation. I don't know, I guess an argument for that can be made. I also do like how the Combine architecture is built upon the city, which makes sense since the city itself probably provides enough structures for the Combine already, and so they just build off it with their own technology. It's also here where you get to see Striders marching through the streets, and it just really helps give you a sense of how much control the Combine has over the city and Earth as well. It's mentioned a few times throughout the game that the Combine decimated Earth's defenses in just 7 hours, showing their power. The game does a really great job establishing the threat you're up against. There is a play area you walk by that is isolated due to the Combine activating something called the suppression field, which stops humans reproducing. This explains why there are no kids in Half-Life 2. The last remaining kids before the suppression field grew up in the 20 years, and all the humans that you see in the game will be the last generations of humans to walk the Earth, as part of the Combine's plan to commit mass genocide. It's kind of disturbing. What's more sad is that as you approach the play area, you can hear drowned out laughs of kids. It just shows how evil the Combine really are. They come to Earth to steal all of its resources and then kill us all slowly and painfully. Gordon then walks through the apartments as you see one get raided, and you can even hear the citizen being beat up, and how a lot of the rooms don't even have doors anymore. They just have boarded up door frames, and you can see a couple trying to get through the hard times, showing how it is mentally affecting the citizens as well. Some Combine then raid the building due to a miscount, as civil protection then come to kill citizens, as Gordon heads for the roof and runs across rooftops. Gordon then heads into a building and gets beat up by some CP units.
Over here! Ha! No, you don't! Dr. Freeman, I presume.
So the game then introduces Alex Vance as the daughter of Eli Vance, another character in this game, and they also establish her personality as she is poking fun at Gordon being a silent protagonist.
Man, a few words, aren't you?
Anyway, they meet up with Dr. Kleiner, and immediately get to work on teleporting Gordon to Black Mesa East, which is basically an outpost for the rebels. As Gordon tries to get his suit on, Barney is attacked by a pet headcrab.
Here we go. Ah! Damn it, get it off me! Lamar, there you are. I thought you got rid of that pest.
Certainly not. Never fear, Gordon. She's debeaked and completely harmless. The worst you might do is attempt to couple with your head, fruitlessly.
Get that thing away from me.
Here, my pet. Hop up. No, not up there. No, no. Careful, Lamar. Those are quite fragile. Oh, fie. It'll be another week before I can coax her out of there.
Yeah, longer if we're lucky.
Barney, you're not an animal person.
I love all the characters in this game, and their quirks, but I'll get onto that once we get onto the story section. The intro section has gone on long enough as it is. Anyway, they teleport Alex to Black Mesa East, and it works, so they try and then send Gordon there too, but Lamar, Kleiner's pet headcrab, gets caught in the harmonic reflex thing from Blue Shift, where he visits Dr. Breen's office and he recognizes Gordon, which makes sense since it's established he was the administrator of Black Mesa. And there's also a cameo of the Ichthyosaur, before then ending up outside. Barney then comes to give you a crowbar as the Combine sirens are blaring, as the Combine are now on full alert, now that they are aware of your presence. Which makes sense since Gordon defeated the Nihilith in the first game, and so he is the only one who could pose a threat to the Combine. Barney gives you a crowbar and then tells you to get out of City 17 and head for Black Mesa East. And now this is where we finally get into the gameplay of Half-Life 2. The first Half-Life revolutionized first-person shooters with its structure and game design. You had the more traditional combat arenas with different types of enemies, which would require different tactics to take down. You had puzzles to solve, platforming, and characters to interact with. Now, obviously 6 years later, pretty much every game has this, so it's not as impressive, but Half-Life definitely deserves a lot of credit for this. So, 6 years later, how does Half-Life 2 add or improve upon the original? Well, let's get into that, starting off with the combat. Half-Life 2's combat is a massive step up from Half-Life 1. The Combine soldiers, which are basically this game's version of the HECU Marines from the first game, are a lot more fun to fight, mainly because the damage they do to you is a lot more fair, even on hard, and they do a lot more than just stand and take pot shots at you. The artificial intelligence does feel smarter, although not much smarter. They're not a massive improvement upon the HECU Marines, but at least there's fun to be had here, unlike the first game. I do have issues with them, however. During the first couple sections of the game, you are fighting CP units with pistols, and it really isn't all that challenging. Once they get SMGs, then they are actually more challenging and more fun to fight, but during the first couple sections of the game, I never really felt as if it took much effort to put them down. From that point onwards, the only other problem with the balancing is the shotgunners. They can take you out in like 3 shots, and this shotgun has a much higher fire rate than yours, so it's really not fair. I do also feel as if the environments in some areas are too big, and there isn't enough cover for both the Combine and the player. So at times the combat arenas can just feel a bit bland. There are different variants of Combine soldiers, such as Elites, which have pulse rifles and have extreme precision, or the Combine Sniper, which you have to throw grenades or shoot rockets at to take down. They are fun to fight, and they do appear to be quite intelligent, as when you take cover, they will shoot out any other cover that you can take to make sure you have less cover from them if you're hiding behind cover. That's a lot of cover. For example, if there's a barrel next to you and you're hiding behind cover, and it's in view of the sniper, then it will shoot the barrel, killing you. Overall, I had a lot more fun fighting these guys than the HECU Marines. The headcrabs are back, and they act pretty much the same as before, only this time they can be killed in 1 hit from the crowbar instead of 2, meaning that you can kill them mid-air and watch their corpse go flying across the room. It's so cool. There are 2 new types of headcrabs. There is the poison headcrab, which cannot kill you, but it will always drop your health down to 1, meaning that on its own it's not that deadly of an enemy, but when you combine it with other zombie-like enemies, then they will become a problem for you. Plus they have a distinctive noise so you know when they're around. There is also the fast headcrab, which is just a headcrab that moves and attacks much faster. These are the most annoying ones in the game since they can just spam you with attacks. It gets old really fast. What I do like though is that these new headcrabs introduce new types of zombies. Now the original zombies do return, and they act pretty much the same way as before, just with more fluid animations. You can actually cut them in half, and sometimes it will kill them, but other times they will just continue crawling towards you and attack you, which is frightening. This also happens with the fast zombies. The fast zombies is where the fast headcrab comes from. As you guessed, they are zombies that are insanely fast and agile. They can climb up a building, launch at you, bounce you across the room, and have some really disturbing sounds. Overall, they are a really scary enemy to face, especially when you're cornered against them. If you try and close a door or escape from them, then they will try and find other ways in. There is no escaping them. They will find you, and they will kill you. The poison zombie also comes off the poison headcrab, which has poison headcrabs all over its body. It will pick them off its body and throw them at you, and it also has a powerful melee attack. Plus the sound effects for this one is scary too, with some very creepy breathing. Overall, the new zombies and headcrabs are fun to fight. They each change up the gameplay a bit, and your encounters with each one will be different. There is a new enemy type in the form of antlions, which are an actual species. Go look it up. Antlions are very fast creatures and can momentarily fly over and around the player. They do a moderate amount of damage and can be hard to avoid or dodge, but you can use stuff like the gravity gun, which I'll get to in a bit, to knock them back, giving you both a little bit of breathing room and an opportunity to attack. They are fun to fight, especially when you are in areas with multiple levels for them to jump off of. They're a welcome addition to the enemy roster. Ahead of them is the Antlion Guardian, which is a mini-boss. It's the leader of a pack of antlions or something. It takes a lot of firepower to put down, and its attacks can make you go flying and take a good chunk of your health off. But all of its attacks are telegraphed, and so they are dodgeable. It's a pretty fun enemy, although you only fight it twice in the entire game. There are other mini-bosses, like the Combine gunships. The first one you fight is a generic gunship, which shoots at you and has an attack where it shoots out hundreds of bombs at you. You start off in a sort of cat and mouse game with it, until you get the upper hand later in the chapter. It's fun to fight, but it does go on for a bit too long. There is also an alien Combine gunship, which is similar to the fight with the helicopter in the original Half-Life, where you have to use the laser-guided missiles to shoot it down, but it can also shoot your rockets down, so you have to use the laser guide on the rockets to steer the rockets around its gun and hit it. Once again, it's a fun fight, but it's reused a bit too much for its own good, and does get old after a bit. You only fought that helicopter once in the first Half-Life, whereas here you fight about 6 or 7 in Half-Life 2. It can get repetitive. The last enemy is the Strider, which is this giant 3-legged monster which you have to shoot down with rockets. Unlike the gunship, it can't shoot your rockets down, but it can take you out in 2 seconds, meaning you can't just brute force your way through this one. They can also dynamically lower themselves in order to shoot you, meaning that you are very rarely safe from them. They only appear towards the end of the game, and can be fun to fight, but I do feel as if the courtyard level is a bit unfair. There isn't much cover for the player to take at first, meaning Striders basically have an insta-kill on you. You do have to move to different areas to get more rocket ammo, which is good, because it means the player can't just stay in one area and shoot them down, but I do feel as if the distances in between these areas are a bit much, and it's too easy for Striders to kill you. Like, I'm not saying I don't want a challenge, because if the game isn't hard, then it won't be fun, but I also don't like it when I die due to unfair bullshit. If you die in a video game, it should be your own fault, period. Overall, the Striders are fun, but some sections with them are bullshit. Now, there isn't as much enemy variety as the first Half-Life, which to some may be disappointing because some enemies like the Hound Eyes or the Bull Squids were really fun to fight, but I'd prefer to criticize the game for what it has rather than what it doesn't have. The enemies in the game do have downsides, although a lot of it is due to the actual level design, but there is a lot of fun sections with them. Pretty much the only enemies I get bored with are the Combine soldiers, but even then, combat sections with them don't go on for too long. In fact, that's one of the many things I like about Half-Life 2, the combat sections never drag on and outstay their welcome, so it's rare that they'll get boring, but it does still happen. Moving on to weapons, the crowbar makes a return as the only melee weapon. It's mostly used for headcrabs and destroying boxes with resources in them. It can also be used to conserve ammo against zombies, but overall it's more of a tool than a weapon. The first actual gun you get is a USP pistol, which is okay. It has mediocre accuracy and damage. You'll use it for the first couple parts of Root Canal, but after that, it becomes obsolete. The only other times I used it was for non-combat scenarios, so it's okay as a starting weapon, but it doesn't have much use afterwards. Next you get the MP7, which is an SMG with a grenade launcher. It has a good amount of ammo, does a fair amount of damage to enemies, and the sound effect is music to my ears. The grenade launcher is cool too, but you only get 3 of them, so pick wisely. Unlike the pistol, this gun is useful for most of the game, especially during group encounters with Combines or Antlions. After that is the shotgun, which, just like the first game, can fire one barrel or both barrels. Although shooting both barrels uses twice the ammo and slows down the rate of fire, but it does increase the damage. The shotgun is mostly the same as the first game, which is okay, but there wasn't much wrong with this shotgun to begin with. It's most fun to use against zombies and close encounters with Combines. The downside to the shotgun though is that it drains ammo really damn fast, and so you cannot consistently use it if you want to be effective in combat. After that is the crossbow, which acts the same as the first game, only this time it is a one-hit kill on pretty much every enemy. This is because instead of tranquilizer darts, it has heated rebar which shoots straight through enemies and can even pin them to the wall. It's a really fun weapon to use, but the downside to it is that you have to be really precise, and the rebar shots, while not exactly slow, can definitely be avoided by moving enemies. Thus you'll need to lead your shots, and also you only get 10 shots with it at any time. The RPG is pretty much the same as the first game, but the controlled rockets are much more fluid and easier to steer, making them more useful in combat and for taking out gunships. Once again though, only 3 shots, and you only get ammo for it every once in a while, so you cannot consistently rely on it to save you. Grenades are back, and you can either throw them, which is useful for exploding enemies at a distance, or just dropping a grenade in a room and then quickly get into cover, avoiding the blast. And finally, I've saved the best till last, the gravity gun. Woo! What can I say about this gun that hasn't already been said? The gravity gun was a perfect way for Valve to show off their brand spanking new physics engine, but it also gives reason for it to exist within the gameplay. With the gravity gun you can pick up objects and throw them and also drop them, which means you can create ways to climb up areas, but it's also really fun in combat. The way it works is that you can pick up almost any object you want and throw it at enemies. If the object is bigger, then it will do more damage. If it is smaller, then it will do less damage. It makes it so that pretty much the entire environment is a weapon for the player. There are a few objects that are still too heavy to pick up for the gravity gun, which is great because since there are limitations to it, it means that the player cannot be overpowered. But the fact that pretty much anything you can pick up, such as explosive barrels, filing cabinets, boxes, buckets of paint, saw blades, and you can kill zombies, combines, and antlines with it, it just makes the gameplay insanely fun. Heck, I'd even say it might be possible to play through the rest of the game just using the gravity gun. It's such a fun weapon to use, and it really gives this game some unique gameplay elements. Although what I do like about the gravity gun is that apart from a few sequences and the very end of the game, you aren't forced to use it. The game gives you the tools and then you decide what to do with them. It's nice to have so much freedom in how I fight enemies, and I have fun trying to find creative things to do with the gun, such as blocking doors to stop enemies coming through, or they'll throw a grenade at me and so I'll throw it back at them. It's so much fun to use. So much fun. Now, while Half-Life 2 does have less weapons than the first game, it ultimately doesn't bother me, since some of the weapons in the original game would become obsolete after certain points, which to be fair that does happen with the USP pistol in this game. I think it's due to the original game having too many weapons, and so ultimately I wouldn't use half of them, because some of them would just become pointless after a while. Half-Life 2 does have less weapons, but all of them, aside from the aforementioned USP pistol, remain useful and fun for pretty much the entire game, and it helps make the weapons more useful and distinct, since the weapon roster isn't bloated with guns that feel the same. However, I do have a criticism with Half-Life 2 that may break the enjoyment of the game for some, and that is, the shooting mechanics aren't all that great. Now, the original game didn't have fantastic shooting mechanics either, but I think it's laughable that a game that releases 6 years later has barely improved the shooting mechanics whatsoever. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the shooting in the Half-Life games is awful, it gets the job done, but it isn't enough to hold a game, which is why Valve tries to make up with that with each chapter having so much variety from the last. I think they did this because otherwise the game would get boring really fast, which is why combat encounters only last around 2 to 3 minutes, and then the game has some platforming puzzles, or a story sequence, or a fun traversal segment. Because if the game was nothing but shooting, you get bored so quickly due to the lackluster shooting mechanics. I mean, lackluster shooting mechanics isn't the end of the world for a shooting game. I enjoyed Doom 3 despite its crappy shooting mechanics, just because of how much fun the enemies and weapons were. But when a game like Halo 2, which is a console FPS, has better shooting mechanics than a PC FPS like Half-Life, and it only released a week prior to Half-Life 2, then yeah, I'm gonna raise some questions. I think this is why the later parts of the game are the weaker parts, because there is so much combat. It's not poorly designed or anything, but the sheer amount of it can get old. But there is more to Half-Life 2 than just shooting. The biggest thing that keeps the game fresh over its runtime is the variety from chapter to chapter. Let's go through them all, shall we? The first two chapters of the game, Point Insertion and A Red Letter Day, are you walking around and experiencing the world building and the story and the characters being introduced. The next chapter, Root Canal, nice pun by the way, Valve, is you taking out civil protection units while getting help from others in City 17. Water Hazard has you driving a boat out of City 17, with a few shootouts here and there to keep the action from being mundane. There is a helicopter chase and a mini-boss. You do get a gunship gun attached to the boat halfway through, and taking out APCs and Combine while driving across the river is so much fun. The next chapter, Black Mesa East, is a story section which further develops the plot and characters. I think its inclusion here is important since the last hour and a half of the game has been almost nothing but action, so having a section where the player can relax and the story can be developed, and the relationships between all the characters can develop as well, helps bridge the gap for the next chapter. It allows the game to slow down for a second while still giving something interesting for the player to do. It also introduces the gravity gun so the player can get accustomed to it for the next chapter, Ravenholm. Ravenholm is pretty much a sandbox for the gravity gun, and you get pretty much all the freedom you want with it. Plus it helps introduce new enemies and a new character, Father Grigori, into the mix, who is just batshit crazy. It's probably my favourite chapter in the game. The next chapter puts you in a buggy and you drive across the coast while stopping off at some houses to kill antlions and combines, as well as picking up some supplies. It's similar to the boat section in that regard, and you even have the Tau cannon from Half-Life 1 attached to the car, so that's cool. There's even a cool sequence where you have to fight off combines at a gunship and a lighthouse. It's so much fun. The next chapter has you playing the floor is lava with the sand, as the antlions bury themselves in the sand, and the sand is a bit sensitive here. In fact, the sand is so sensitive that any movement on the sand and they will instantly come out and try to murder you. Then you raid Nova Prospect with a pack of antlions after murdering the Guardian and taking bug bait. The opening section here is like D-Day, and you have to use the antlions as both bait for the enemies and also to attack the enemies. It's really fun to have these enemies now fight for you, and the level design is great. It has a lot of room and gives a lot of opportunities to use the antlions. The next chapter has you enter the depot and fight with Alex, and also has a cool tower defense segment which is either fun or annoying depending on how you set up your turrets. The next chapter has you back in City 17 fighting alongside resistance members against Combine forces and Striders. Barney also comes back and fights alongside you towards the end. And then the final chapter of the game takes away all your weapons but gives you a supercharged gravity gun which can blast enemies back and pick them up. It is the definition of a power trip and makes you feel like such a fucking badass, because these dudes have been hammering you the whole game, but now you're unstoppable. It's a great way to close off the game. Now, not all of these ideas are executed perfectly. For example, Water Hazard is a cool chapter, but it goes on for far too long for a first-time playthrough. After replaying the game a couple times, the pacing in the chapter is better than I originally realized, but I still think it could have been trimmed a bit. With Highway 17, the little blue dune buggy is a cool vehicle, but the controls aren't always solid. During certain sections, the car feels a bit stiff, and thus turning around certain corners can be a hassle. I also don't like fighting with the resistance soldiers, since they often block your path and can act like bollards to you. So Half-Life 2 doesn't always succeed at everything it attempts to do, but most of the variety here is great fun, and even the weakest part of the game, Anti-Citizen 1, with all the resistance members blocking your path, still has a lot of fun sections. So in the end, Half-Life 2 may not have the best shooting mechanics out there, but what it does have is fun weapons, challenging enemies, levels that give so much freedom to the player, and allow you to do pretty much whatever you want to do, and a great amount of variety from chapter to chapter, making this one of the best FPS games I've ever played. But as mentioned before, Half-Life 2 has a lot more focus on story than the previous game, so let's see if those efforts paid off. The great thing about Half-Life 2 is that it retains the same style of storytelling that worked so well in the previous game. Half-Life 1's story was the typical science experiment goes wrong and causes an alien invasion thing, but what made it work so well was the way it was told. It was a simple story, but it was told in a complex manner, with environmental storytelling, and making the player feel part of the world by making it feel like the characters are talking to the player, not Gordon. The dialogue was also well written so that each conversation starts and ends with what the character says, thus dialogue from Gordon was not needed. The game never left the perspective of Gordon Freeman, and there were no cutscenes or long lines of text telling the story. The story was told through the world the player inhabited. Black Mesa was the main character of the game, with a lot of mystery and suspense behind each corner. and there were a lot of unanswered questions regarding the G-Man. So overall, while Half-Life's story wasn't the most complex out there, the way the story was told kept the player engaged, the dialogue was well written, and there was a lot of mystery that made you want to come back and explore more of the game. How does Half-Life 2 fare? Well, since it's been 6 years since the first game, the storytelling isn't groundbreaking as many games have adapted Half-Life's storytelling formula since. But that doesn't mean the story, and in turn the storytelling, isn't solid. Because it is. Half-Life 2 once again keeps the plot pretty simple. An alien race known as the Combine have taken over Earth and have been continuously draining Earth of its resources, which is shown, not told, throughout the game, as you can see many areas where the oceans have been drained away and ships have just gotten stuck in the sand. You can see how hard life is for those who live in City 17 and those out of it, and many who have to just find whatever they can, like wood, sheet metal, and just random pieces of fence to keep a roof over their heads. You can see how ruthless the Combine is with those who oppose them, as they just constantly bombard their base of operations with head crabs. You can see the damage the Combine has done to the water with how toxic it is. There are many, many examples of Half-Life 2 showing and not telling and doing a damn fine job at it. The game is able to get across so many different aspects of its world, all with very little words being said. In terms of environmental storytelling, there are a bunch of great examples here. In the water hazard chapter, you can find this one corner where a lambda cache is, and you can find a zombie and a bunch of other headcrabs. This game is able to convey that this is some unlucky soul trying to survive, and he got overwhelmed by headcrabs. You get how resourceful the Combine are by the fact that they don't always build entire structures for their headquarters. Oftentimes, like in Nova Prospect, they will just use existing structures and build off of it. You can see how Dog is built out of many different pieces of Combine technology. The game is showing you how he was built, not telling. There is so many, and I mean so many great examples of storytelling in this game. I could go over every single one of them, but I just love how Half-Life 2 treats you like a mature person, and even though the game isn't always subtle with its story, it never feels the need to spell something out for you. In terms of characters, they're all really good too. None of them are the most complex or interesting characters in existence, but then again, they don't have to be in order for the story to work. Barney Calhoun is always trying to stay upbeat in a depressing world. It's a great way for the game to connect itself to the previous game, and it means not every second of the story is dark and gritty. He has a lot of great charm that makes him one of the more memorable characters, and he's always devoted to stopping the Combine. I kinda wish we got to see more of what he does behind the scenes of being an undercover CP unit, but it's always nice to see a friendly face, and plus he has some funny lines.
Good job, Gordon. Throwing that switch and all. I can see your MIT education really pays for itself.
Alex Vance is probably my favorite character. She's kind of a love interest for Gordon, but it isn't focused on too much. Alex shows a wide range of different emotions throughout the story of the game, which helps make her feel like a real person. There's times where she acts like a complete smartass, there's times where she's at a complete loss and has no idea what to do. The facial animations really do help get across a great range of different emotions in just the way she looks, or just the way she says something or looks at something. In fact, a lot of the characters have unique body language, and it helps give the player a good idea of what the character is thinking and feeling just by the way they move. Alex also tries to stay positive, often making jokes about Gordon. But then she also has moments of just getting pissed off or losing control.
Damn her! I don't believe this! Come on, Gordon. Now we've really got to hurry.
She's a great character and works for giving the story a more human element. Isaac Kleiner works as sort of a more objective look at the situation. While he too has a lot of charm, and is clearly a very caring person by the way he interacts with characters like Eli and Alex, he tries to rely more on facts rather than feeling, and when looking at a situation, tries to remove any personal feelings about it.
And another of your friends arrived several days ago.
Dog, you made it. Good boy.
So there, you see? It's not all hopeless.
I wish I shared your optimism, Doctor.
Which makes him one of the more unique characters in the game. Dog is pretty cool. He's a character that doesn't speak, so the player already has a connection to him that way, and the game shows his emotions through body language. He's clearly meant to be comedic relief, and he does that just fine. You even get to fight with him towards the end of the game, and he wrecks shit. I think Dr. Mossman is the only character I don't like. She's well written, but we never really get to develop a connection with her, and so the reveal that she's working for the Combine, while surprising, lacks weight. She does get development after the reveal, and she does kind of win herself back afterwards, but even then I still feel like she's very underdeveloped, especially for this type of story. Eli Vance is the Resistance leader and the father of Alex Vance. He's actually that scientist that told you to get topside in the first game.
Please, get to the surface as soon as you can and let someone know we're stranded down here.
He clearly sees an interest between Gordon and Alex, and they even have that awkward father talk.
I can't believe you made it so quickly on foot.
I believe he broke your record, honey.
Well, he earned it. I guess you proved you can handle yourself out there.
There's nothing Gordon can't handle, with the possible exception of you.
Dad, please.
He's someone who's always trying to figure out what to do next and exploring new possibilities and technology. He's also missing a foot, which gives an idea of how much he's been through fighting against the Combine. He clearly has a lot of respect for Gordon, and it's nice to see another friendly face from Black Mesa. Finally, there is Dr. Breen, who is the antagonist. Even if you don't see him much throughout the game, you definitely feel his presence. He's obsessed with the power he has, and the power he still wants, and he will do anything to get it. He's not someone who can be reasoned with. He's so full of himself that he starts believing his own lies. His goals are clear and understandable, while still leaving some mystery as to what Breen's ultimate goal is. He's a great antagonist, and when you meet him at the end, it does truly feel like a long time coming. All the characters are well voice acted too, with each voice perfectly suiting the character and getting across their emotions. Anyway, on to the story itself. So after Barney gives Gordon the crowbar, the next hour and a half of the game is Gordon traveling to Black Mesa East. There are some cool character interactions along the way, but overall, this 90-minute segment of the game is pretty much all gameplay, which I think is fair since the game has spent around half an hour building up the story. And now that it's gotten everything necessary out of the way, the game allows the player to just have some fun with the gameplay. The first thing you do come across is police brutality. This shows how bullish the Combine are even further. What is cool though is that these characters do make an appearance further into the game. Continuing further down the canal and having to fight more CP units, Freeman comes across a container with a citizen of Vortigaunt in it. Funny enough, the Vortigaunt is watching TV, which shows that Vortigaunts are becoming more accustomed to human lifestyles, and also that the Vortigaunt is powering it. What's cool though is that this citizen has no idea who you are, but the Vortigaunt knows you perfectly.
Guess those sirens are for you, huh? Good thing you found us. You're not the first to come through here,
This is the Freeman. The Combine's reckoning has come.
Which again links itself back to Half-Life 1. The Vortigaunts know how destructive Gordon is. The citizen also refers to the Vortigaunt as friend.
Meanwhile, let my Vortigaunt friend here give you a jolt to get you going.
That should keep the Freeman safe.
Meaning that this isn't just an alliance, it's much more. Okay, sure, I realize how bad that sounds, fuck. Anyway, Gordon continues through a wreckage and sees CP units up ahead shooting citizens who are just up against the wall. The Combine are fucking brutal, yo. And I like how the game doesn't hold back on showing you just how evil the Combine are. The CP units murder citizens just to get their jollies off. They are giving the player plenty of good reasons to oppose the Combine for all that they do, so that's good storytelling as well. However, this does conflict a bit with some previous parts of the game where they establish that people join civil protection just to have a stable life. So am I supposed to sympathize with them or not? I guess I'm not supposed to sympathize with them, I'm just supposed to empathize with them. But it does cause a bit of a disconnect with the enemies you fight. There is also another disconnect with the player, but I'll get into that in a bit. Gordon continues further along, and the Combine send a helicopter after him. Like, he's just one person, yet they're sending this much force on him. It establishes pretty well that Gordon is important to the Combine, but that the Combine are also aware of his skills. Continuing further, Gordon comes across another person held up in the sewers. What's funny is that he also doesn't know who you are, or that you're the guy the Combine is looking for.
Civil protection is onto us. We're tearing up the railroad, covering our tracks. Looks like you're gonna be the last one through. Be glad you're not the guy they're looking for. Poor bastard doesn't stand a chance. Sounds like they're calling in every CP unit in City 17.
The Combine flood the sewers with manhacks, and you have to help this guy take them down. There are some supplies here too. A cool detail that many won't know about this is that if you leave the room and then come back, you can find the man dead with a manhack over his corpse. This helps add to the depressing tone of the game, the fact that no matter what you do, some people are just going to die anyway. I like it because it's subtle and helps immerse you in the world more, as it makes it feel more alive by adding in stuff like this. Side note, I also like how the lander caches show how everyone is desperate in this world for supplies. Like, they actually have to strategically find and mark areas to store supplies for others. I know it's there for gameplay purposes, but it's one thing Half-Life 2 does very well, giving the gameplay a really good context to exist within the world. Freeman continues to a rebel outpost where you can hear Alex on the radio telling the outpost to give Freeman supplies, and also, continuing on from earlier, I also do like that this dude here isn't sure if you're Gordon Freeman at first.
Hey! You're Freeman, aren't you? We got word you were coming. You got here at a bad time.
It just shows that not everyone is aware of Gordon Freeman. Unfortunately, the camp gets shelled with headcrabs, showing how the Combine weaponizes everything. It's also disturbing to see rebels scream in pain as their heads get devoured by headcrabs. Fuck man, this game really earns the M for Mature rating. A nice lady then has a boat fueled for Freeman and she tells you to head for the Red Barn just across the river. However, it is a bit weird that Alex knows Gordon is going to end up at this place to retrieve the boat. Like, how would she know? What if Gordon took a different path? I mean, Gordon has so far had help with other rebels guiding him throughout the journey, so he knows to get from point B to point C, and yada yada, but these people aren't in contact with Alex, so how would they let her know that Gordon is on this path? Did she order them to get the boat filled up just in case? I guess that can make sense, but even then, that's quite a plot contrivance. Barney did tell Gordon to take the route through the old canals, but even then, there are plenty of opportunities where Gordon could have taken a different path. I guess they have a rough idea of where Gordon is going, but it all just does seem a bit convenient that Gordon ends up exactly where he needs to be. It doesn't take me out of the game, but it was worth noting. Anyway, Gordon then travels across the canals in the boat. A lot of fun stuff here, but not much story related. A helicopter then starts chasing Gordon, but Gordon does eventually get an upgrade on the boat in the form of the same gun the helicopter uses. Gordon then continues down the canal and eventually takes down the helicopter and makes it to Black Mesa East. After that 90 minutes of fun and exciting gameplay, it's time for some story. Gordon arrives and gets greeted by Dr. Judith Mossman, who clearly respects Gordon, though this may just be a mask to hide the fact that she's a spy for the Combine. She's a nerdy scientist who goes on and on about random stuff that most people don't care about.
We're closing in on a reliable local teleport technology, something the Combine still hasn't mastered. Eli thinks their portals are string-based, similar to our Calabi-Yau model, but they've failed to factor in the dark energy equations. They can tunnel through from their universe, but once they're here, they're dependent on local transportation. If they knew what we were doing with entanglement...
What I do like about this elevator ride is that it just shows stuff that is way more interesting than whatever Mossman is talking about, and thus you'll be more interested in that than her, meaning that the game isn't trying to create a bond with Mossman, so that when Alex and Mossman have arguments later, you'll more easily side with Alex, not only because she's in the right, but also because you're more established with her. It's another good storytelling technique and is very subtle. The game then gets you acquainted with Eli.
Gordon Freeman. Let me get a look at you, man. My God, you haven't changed one iota. How do you do it? Now, let's see. The last time I saw you, I sent you up for help after the resonance cascade. I never thought it would take you this long to get back to me.
What's cool is that during this section, if you stand next to certain objects, then Eli will comment on them. It's cool because it gives the player a chance to find out more about Eli's family, Dr. Breen, and some weird stuff Alex brings in. At the same time, though, there isn't really much else to do in this area, so it's not like it's encouraging the player to do much to find out more about the story. Alex arrives, and there is some cool banter between the characters to help flesh out their relationships to the player.
Alex, I thought you were on watch.
The Vortigons relieved me so I could come see Gordon. Anyway, I should be in here working on the portal.
I have the repairs well in hand. Someone misjudged the capacity of the Combine thyristor.
Are you blaming me?
No, not at all. It was a calculation error, not a mechanical problem.
Then maybe you should let me do the calculations next time, as well as installing it.
Alex, really? Sometimes I think you deliberately misunderstand me.
It's also nice to see the characters talk about things that aren't just the Combine, showing that there is more to Half-Life's universe than just that. Alex and Mossman then have a disagreement, but Eli comes to break it up and recommends that Alex goes and teaches Gordon how to use the gravity gun. Alex then introduces you to the gravity gun and dog, and you play a game of fetch. It's nice to have some downtime and some moments of enjoyment in this bleak world, so I appreciate Valve for adding this section into the game. It almost makes me wonder what these characters would be like if there wasn't a huge war with the Combine. It doesn't last too long, however, as the Combine then shell the base, and Gordon and Alex get separated. Gordon then makes his way through Ravenholm, where he meets Father Grigori.
You've stirred up hell. A man after my own heart. Here, I have a more suitable gun for you. You'll need it. Catch! Good. Now, keep it close.
This is a crazy man who has set up traps to use against the zombies. This was a town that was shelled to shit, and now every living person there is a zombie. Although what's creepy is that you can still hear cries and screams, meaning that there might still be some people out there dealing with the zombies. Grigori is a great companion, and his craziness just makes this chapter more enjoyable, and also one of the standout characters and chapters in the game. Anyway, Freeman then heads through some mines and then through some train tracks to a resistance outpost where he fights off Combine. Not everyone is lucky though.
Who's hurt?
Winston's been hit.
Patch him up and get him to the back as soon as he's stable.
Even worse news then comes.
I've been on the line with Alex. Her father's been captured.
Over here, Dr. Freeman.
Eli Vance is indispensable to the liberation.
Alex then comes on the radio and tells Gordon where to head and orders the base to bring out a little Doom buggy. It's nice that we're getting some story, but not enough to break the flow of the game. The player is free to explore the game and story at their own pace. However, I do think the way Eli's capture is revealed is a bit weak though. I would have preferred to see it rather than just... Oh yeah, Eli's captured by the way. It's not that I don't care, it's just not as engaging. Anyway, Gordon then gets the little Doom buggy in the sand, and then continues across Highway 17. Once again, Half-Life 2 has a good ratio of story to gameplay. You get a 5 to 10 minute long story segment, and then you blow shit up for 2 hours. It's pretty good if you ask me. There are a couple stops along the way, but this chapter is mostly just Gordon trying to meet up at the next outpost. One of them involves probably the funniest character in the game, Odessa Cubbage, who hands you a rocket launcher.
Ah yes, Gordon Freeman. I couldn't have asked for a finer volunteer. Colonel Odessa Cubbage at your service.
I really like that Half-Life 2 does have a group of characters with a range of personalities, but it doesn't go overboard with it, because then it would be distracting and take away from the immersion. I also do like the detail on this jacket, which shows off him being part of the actual military. Anyway, Gordon then takes down a gunship, has a cool shootout at a shipping yard, and there is a cool section with the bridge. Gordon eventually makes it to the lighthouse and has to ditch the car since the Combine will be on high alert for it, which doesn't make sense to me since Gordon himself is already on high alert by the Combine, so I don't think ditching the car would stop that. After a cool shootout at the lighthouse, the car is then captured and so Gordon has to continue on foot. He then comes across these two who are battling antlions.
Laszlo, don't move! No! Help! Dear God! Poor Laszlo! The finest mind of his generation!
What I do like is that there is some cool dialogue for this guy here if you stick around. It helps humanize the minor characters in the story.
We were heading for the Vortigaunt camp, hoping to pick up some bug baits of these damn things and leave us alone. But without Laszlo, what's the point? I know you tried to help. I'll stay with him a while. There's something I have to do. Go ahead. I hope you have better luck than we had.
Gordon then has to cross the antlion sand and fight the Guardian, and then the Vortigaunt comes out to give Freeman theropods, which will assist him in raiding Nova Prospect, the prison in which Eli is being held. What ensues is a pretty awesome D-Day style level with some cliff climbing and then storming the prison. It's really fun, and the antlions provide a bunch of different ways to help the player progress. Since not much story-related stuff happens for a bit, I'll skip to when Gordon enters the depot with Alex. There is this part where you get to see other people who have been held captive in the depot that are probably going to be used for something horrible. It's also nice to see Alex again, because the last time you were with Alex was hours ago, like in actual gameplay hours. After a few combat encounters, Alex and Gordon eventually meet up with Eli.
Alex, Gordon, is that really you? I can't believe you found me.
Dad, are you all right?
I'm fine, but you've got to get out of here.
We're here to get you out, Dad.
Never mind me. Save
No,
yourselves.
we're not leaving you.
It helps show how much Eli cares for Alex and Gordon, and how he knows the danger of staying in the depot, but Alex cares too much about her father. It's not exactly subtle, but the voice acting and facial animations do make the scene feel much more alive, due to the level of emotion portrayed here. Gordon then has to continue through the depot, while Alex figures out how to get Eli to the Combine portal. Alex does eventually meet up with Gordon, and, plot twist time.
I'm not calling about that.
What's she up to?
You promised you weren't going to touch Eli.
Oh my
The
God.
soldiers were a bit overzealous, I admit, but he was too tempting a prize to simply turn loose, especially in the absence of Gordon Freeman.
You would have had Freeman if you'd been patient and just waited for my signal.
We weren't entirely sure you were ever going to get around to that. Human loyalties being what they are.
Dr. As I have stated before.
Alex and Gordon then meet up with Mossman, and I like this whole asshole smile and wave Alex gives, like, yeah, I know you're full of shit. Mossman constantly tries to justify her actions, but Alex isn't having any of it.
I've already reprogrammed the modulator to emulate a Zen relay.
That's my father's work you stole.
It's my work, too. And I had to prove to Dr. Breen that your father would be the most valuable member of any research effort going forward.
Enough of your bullshit!
It's realistic human drama, and the expressive nature of Alex contrasts really well with the cold and simplistic nature of Mossman. It does just show how really different they are, and I like that the game built up a rivalry with them before, because otherwise this sudden burst of anger from Alex wouldn't be as believable. Alex then brings Eli into the teleporter, and then Mossman causes a distraction so that she can slip into the teleporter with Eli and escape. Alex then has no idea where they went, so she powers up the teleporter again with the coordinates being Dr. Kleiner's lab. The issue I have with this scene is that Alex doesn't try to tell Eli that Mossman's a spy for the Combine and expose her. I mean, he would have found out by Mossman's actions anyway, but why would Alex not warn her father about her? Also, with this whole distraction thing, yes, it distracts Alex, but what about the player? Most first-time players will be distracted alongside Alex, but what if you're doing a second playthrough of the game, and you know it's coming, yet there is nothing you can do to stop Mossman, even though you're looking right at her causing the distraction? It just causes a weird disconnect, because Gordon could easily stop Mossman here, but even if the player, aka Gordon, is fully aware of what Mossman intends to do, he can't stop her. Either way, the teleporter then collapses as Gordon and Alex then get out, as we arrive in Dr. Kleiner's lab. I love the image of Kleiner holding the shotgun. Apparently though, something weird happened when we teleported here.
I was afraid we might not make it either. I think the teleport exploded just as we were porting out.
Indeed it did, and the repercussions were felt far and wide, but that was over a week ago.
What do you mean? Gordon and I were just there a minute ago.
Fascinating. We seem to have developed a very slow teleport.
Yeah, so we jump forward in time a week because of the teleporter. Wait, does this mean that time travel exists in the Half-Life universe? If so, can we go to 2015 and see all the cool shit they have made? Oh wait, the Combine is taken over. We're not going to have, hoverboards and weird fucking jackets. Yeah. I also just think it's a lazy storytelling aspect. Like, the only reason the week jumped is because the story needs to have the City 17 uprising part. Oh yeah, that should be mentioned. Alex and Gordon destroying the Combine portal was the linchpin to the uprising in City 17. Barney has been leading it for a week, but the bad news is that Eli is now in the Citadel, the Combine's most heavily guarded fortress on Earth. While some of the storytelling that led to this point is kind of whack, I love how perfectly the third act of the game is set up. We have a clear objective, get inside the Citadel, we know the stakes of the situation, and we know that this will be the toughest battle for the characters to go through. Gordon then goes with Dog, and Dog fucks shit up. Anyway, in terms of plot, nothing major happens throughout the next couple sections. I mean, the game is kind of telling its own story by showing the fight against the Combine. They are fun levels, or at least the first couple are, but nothing regarding actual characters, so I'll skip some of this. Gordon does eventually meet up with Alex, and they have to cross a bridge, but the bridge isn't there, so Alex tries to scope out the next path, but is then captured by Combine soldiers. Gordon then continues and meets up with Barney, and together they storm the Overwatch Nexus building, which has a suppression device that destroys anyone who gets close. They get inside and disable it, allowing more rebels to get through, although not without encountering multiple Combine choppers and Striders. It's also really cool to see a City-17 that has had the shit beaten out of it as well. Eventually, after all that battling, they get to the Citadel, and Dog lets Gordon through as we get a very funny, drowned-out F-bomb.
And if you see Dr. Breen, tell him I said...
That's really fucking cool. Gordon then gets to the Citadel, and the mere scale is enough to make you shit yourself. Gordon then makes it inside and travels through using just one of the pods. It's cool to see the inside, and the fact that they keep sending out more Striders and Combine helicopters makes the situation feel hopeless. Then you get dropped out of the pod, and all your weapons get destroyed except the gravity gun, and it has been supercharged, so it can now pick up and throw people. It's so damn fun to just toss these guys around like they're nothing. On the way, you get these transmissions from Dr. Breen. He knows you're coming, and that he can't do anything to stop you, so he uses his own bullshit lies to try and convince you to join him. Like, you even take down a Strider with the supercharged gravity gun. Like, how fucking awesome is that? Gordon then continues to another pod, which takes him to Dr. Breen's office, and on the way, you get to see the whole city. Hope you're not afraid of heights. You then arrive at his office, with Mossman greeting you before you enter his office. Mossman appears to be genuinely sorry for this.
Don't struggle, it's no use. Until you're where he wants you, there's nothing you can do. I'm sorry, Gordon.
Breen then tries to use Gordon and Eli as a bargaining chip, and even brings Alex into the equation. What makes this scene so awesome is that pretty much all the major characters are involved, and the fact that we're completely powerless to do anything right now just adds more tension to the scene. Alex seems like she's gonna rip fucking Breen's head off if she gets the chance. Breen then wants to discuss your contract before sending Alex and Eli away, but then...
Judith, what do you think you're doing?
We're doing what I could never do alone. We're stopping you.
Yes!
Mossman tries to free you, but Breen uses the gravity gun to push you back. Mossman is back on our side and has redeemed herself. Alex and Gordon then chase Dr. Breen to the middle of the Citadel, where Alex shows some affection for Gordon before Gordon goes to wreck shit in the chamber. Dr. Breen even says that he could bring down the whole Citadel, thus killing the people below, but that won't stop Gordon. Gordon then defeats Breen.
No!
Yeah!
You need me!
Come on, Gordon. We've got to get out of here. Maybe we still have...
Time, Dr. Freeman? Is it really that time again? It seems as if you only just arrived.
The G-Man comes in and snatches Gordon right before he's killed by the blast.
I do apologize for what must seem to you an arbitrary imposition, Dr. Freeman. I trust it will all make sense to you in the course of... well, I'm really not at liberty to say. In the meantime, this is where I get off.
Overall, Half-Life 2's story is pretty good. It isn't perfect, there are some plot contrivances, and there are some things that just don't really make sense, but the characters are well written, with interesting dialogue and interactions with other characters and unique personalities, good storytelling with the environment and body language of the characters telling the story, and having a lot of mystery with things like the G-Man and the Combine, which will keep you coming back. So while Half-Life 2's story isn't the best out there, it is a really engaging and memorable one. It's a really good story. Now, the music in Half-Life 2 is one of the best I've heard in a first-person shooter. There are a good variety of different tracks, all of which evoke a certain emotion, and they all fit really well within the game and the sequences they're in. And they even reuse some of the tracks from Half-Life 1, which is cool. For the sake of time, I'll only display my 5 favorites. really well with the gameplay, and there are plenty of ambient tracks, which you've probably heard used throughout the video, all of which convey different emotions. It's really great stuff. So in the end, Half-Life 2 is a tremendous game. The gameplay has great variety and allows the player to get creative, the story has engaging characters and well-written dialogue, and the music creates a level of immersion in the game like no other. There are some issues regarding the shooting mechanics and some logical parts of the story, but none of it stops Half-Life 2 from being one of the best games of 2004, and I am very excited to see where this series goes next. So nearly 2 years after the release of Half-Life 2, we have a continuation in Episode 1. Episode 1 is set shortly after the events of Half-Life 2, and seeks to continue the characters and its story. Episode 1 starts off with a cutscene showing the ending of Half-Life 2, where Alex is about to die from the explosion. Vortigaunts come in and rescue her, and then we get back to G-Man as Vortigaunts block him from getting to Gordon.
We'll see about that.
Should also be mentioned that the graphics have been improved since the original game. I did also get a widescreen monitor in between the last critique and this one, so the quality should look better. Anyway, we then wake up in some rubble as Dog comes to rescue us. I do like the little bump on his head that he does on the debris. It's quite funny.
Doc, I think I found something. Drop what you're doing and help me over here. Oh my God! Gordon! I was so worried.
Anyway, I like that Alex looks immediately embarrassed by hugging Gordon. Kinda makes you think that she has deeper feelings for him. However, I'm a bit confused. So Alex and Gordon were saved by the Vortigaunts, but why did the Vortigaunts teleport them right next to the Citadel when, as we soon find out, it's going to explode the entire city? Why not teleport them to minimum safe distance? I know we wouldn't have a game at that point, but still, there are some leaps in logic I can accept, but this just seems jarring, especially since the Half-Life games are pretty solid in terms of writing, with barely any plot holes or character inconsistencies. Anyway, we then get a transmission from Eli and Kleiner, who are out of the city, and we learn that the Citadel is about to explode, as previously mentioned.
Oh dear, Eli, I'm sorry, but surely there's no need for undue alarm. Alex is well out of harm's way by now.
Well, actually, we're still at the Citadel.
What? Oh dear, but there's really no time. The core is exceedingly close to collapse. Why, there's no way to get far enough without first... Well, nothing short of a direct intervention in the core could possibly retard the reaction.
There is no way Alex and Gordon can get to a safe distance before it explodes, so they decide to go in the Citadel and delay the explosion. I also do like how they use Dog as an antenna. It's kinda cute. I like how the writing with these characters is done. It feels like actual human beings talking to each other and trying to figure out how to go about the situation. It's hard to explain why it feels so natural, but then again, human emotion is a hard thing to explain. Alex and Gordon then traverse the cliff, which quickly introduces the player to the basic mechanics again, without being intrusive on the game. They see an opening, but there is currently no way across, so Dog comes up with an idea and throws a car at Gordon and Alex, with the idea of throwing them across. This is actually foreshadowed with Dog throwing a rock across previously. Anyway, we then get this cute moment between Alex and Dog.
What? Wait a minute. Oh no. You're not serious. Are you?
Well, Gordon, unless you have a better suggestion, he is a robot. He's done the math.
You did do the math, right?
Uh-huh.
Which, according to developer commentary, happened by accident with a glitch in Dog's animation, and so they kept it in. It's cool that accidental details can actually become actual character interactions and add more to the relationship between two characters. Anyway, Dog then does throw Gordon and Alex across, but the structure beneath them collapses, and so they end up in the Citadel. Something cool that I do like is how Valve is able to show something isn't quite right with the Citadel, just with the colors. The Citadel is normally a cold blue color, but due to its collapse and fire being everywhere, it now has a more warm orange to it. cold blue and warm orange contrast really well, and I like that they don't have to go over the top with the Citadel to show how broken it is. Just a simple color flip and you get the idea. You do see some Combine soldiers running through the Citadel, and some ships trying to escape, which makes it feel like there is more going on than what you're seeing. Should also be mentioned that you're with Alex for pretty much the entire expansion, which some will like and some won't. It does help develop Alex's character and a relationship with Gordon, but at the same time I think some players may find her annoying. I like Alex, but unfortunately, my experience when playing the game isn't the only experience. There are a few cool interactions with her, like when you have to take out some stalkers by having Alex reprogram roller mines. It adds to her character of being a hacker. We then get to this room with a bunch of pods below and a recording of Dr. Breen at the end of Half-Life 2.
I can still deliver Earth, but not without your help. The portal destination is untenable. Surely you can set the relay elsewhere. There's no way I can survive in that environment.
Thank God, it's just an old recording.
The host body...
Then this weird creature takes over the screen and one comes out in a pod and causes Alex and Gordon severe headaches, so they escape. Continuing further, you get the gravity gun taken away and supercharged, which is cool. Now, here's where I get into the gameplay. What is annoying is that Episode 1 only has 5 chapters, which is fine for an expansion, but for the first 2 chapters you only have the gravity gun, and you don't get any weapons until halfway through the 3rd chapter, meaning the gameplay is limited for over half the runtime and it gets repetitive. The supercharged gravity gun was fun because the Combine were constantly kicking your ass the whole game, so the fact that you could take them down just like they were nothing was really satisfying. I also know plenty of Half-Life 2 players who wanted to pick up enemies with the gravity gun as soon as they got it, so it was also really satisfying to have that wish answered. The fact that you pretty much just get the super gravity gun right away, and the fact that you use it for at least a quarter of the runtime, doesn't make it very satisfying. And the fact that you have to use the gravity gun half the game is annoying too, because in Half-Life 2, you didn't get the gravity gun until 1/3 through the game. And even then, there are only a few sections where you are forced to use it. In Half-Life 2, they also gave the player new weapons just as the player started to get bored of the old ones they had, thus keeping the gameplay fresh and engaging. When I don't get another weapon until halfway through the game, then the game just gets repetitive and lacks challenge. It would be like if you had the BFG right at the start of Doom, and that was the only weapon you could use for like half the game. It would be fun for a bit, but since it's your only weapon, and a lot of the fun comes from using other weapons, it would get old. They do try and add some variety, like solving puzzles, stopping falling debris from destroying the elevator you're standing on, and some other platforming sections, but the combat does suffer from a lack of variety, at least in the early levels. Anyway, I'll come back to the gameplay in a bit. So, they then arrive at the core, which is insanely bright, thus contrasting with the darker nature of the Citadel. Gordon then goes inside and has to do some combat encounters and puzzles, before then delaying the blast, but it also drains the super gravity gun, making it just a regular gravity gun. Afterwards, Gordon returns to Alex, who has found a video message of Mossman and some data important to the Combine.
I'm fairly sure I've pinned down the location of the project. It's hard to say how much of it might have survived intact, or whether there's anything remaining that could compromise our work, if it were discovered by the Combine. We'll need to take a close look at it, of course, but I should be able to give a better opinion within a few hours. If the site is where we think it is, then it should be no more than... I'm gonna cut this short. We may have been spotted.
So they then make their escape all the way to a train depot in the Citadel, which was actually established previously in the episode. So they just barely escape the Citadel. So, due to the delay of the core exploding, they have a bit more time now, and they can help others escape. However, they are inside a stalker car, and we get some insight into what the stalkers are.
Oh no. It's a stalker car. God damn the Combine. This is what happens to you if you resist. Or if you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. God, I hope you don't remember who you were.
The train then crashes and we have this very disturbing sequence of Alex getting attacked by a stalker. The constant screams and unnatural movement makes this a very unsettling scene, and Alex is physically shook after this moment.
It's moving. That's it. Keep pulling.
So now they have to make it across City 17 all the way to the train station where the other rebels are heading. We first go through a bunch of underground roads with zombies. Alex has a gun, and so you can keep your flashlight on the zombies, and so she will shoot them. Which is funny, because if you leave her in the darkness, she will call out for you. We also do get a little bit of backstory for Gordon's friendship with Barney.
Dr. Kleiner says whenever he locked himself out of his office, you and Barney used to compete to see who could get in fastest without using a key.
I like some cool details like this. It isn't necessary for the plot, but these few extra details really help flesh out the characters and give better context. Finally, we get a pistol and shotgun, and this is where the game becomes more fun. The gameplay isn't very different in Episode 1, which is to be expected because it's an expansion to Half-Life 2, but it means it's just more of Half-Life 2, and while Episode 1 has its moments, it ultimately isn't as much fun. There is a new enemy in the game called the Zombine, which is a combine zombie, and it pulls out a grenade and it's basically a suicide bomber. It's fun, but at the same time it doesn't add much new to the gameplay. And also, because this expansion is mostly like the last levels in City 17 from the main game, which is my least favourite parts of the game, it's basically the part of the game I dislike stretched out for 2 hours. Like, Episode 1 isn't bad by any means, it's a fun 2-hour expansion to one of my favourite games, but it mostly feels just like a filler episode until Episode 2 comes out next year. There are plenty of fun moments and Alex is a cool character to be around, but in terms of story, not much actually happens. The entire game is just Gordon and Alex trying to get out of City 17. In terms of gameplay it's fun, but it gets repetitive. There are antlions to fight in the tunnels, and so you have to use cars to stop them from coming up under the ground, which is a cool gimmick, but doesn't really add much. There are some fun Combine encounters, and there is this boss with an antlion guard, so it's not like there aren't great moments, but a lot of this game is forgettable, and even watching back through the footage while writing the script, there isn't really much I remember about the game itself. In terms of an expansion, I preferred Opposing Force for the original game, because it added new weapons and enemy types, it removed the things I disliked the most about Half-Life 1, and it added some cool new perspectives to the story. After the many street battles, Alex and Gordon then do meet up with the Resistance members, and we do get some funny jokes here.
Previously, certain protein chains important to the process of embryonic development were selectively prevented from forming. This is no longer the case. For those so inclined, now would be an excellent time for procreation. Which is to say, in layman's terms,
Is Dr. Kleiner really telling everyone to
your part for the revival of the
get busy?
We must make the most.
We then meet up with Barney, who says he needs to get the Resistance members to the train station. Since Gordon and Alex are the Combine's top priority because of the data they stole, they take an alternate route path to the Combine off the Resistance for a bit. Barney also does give us another crowbar.
I was getting tired of carrying this around. Listen, I don't have many more of these, so try not to lose this one, okay? Go on across, Gordon. She's waiting for you. You lucky dog, you.
We then get to the best part of the expansion, where there is a shootout in a hospital. While the story is a bit slow, one thing that is kind of missing from Episode 1 is the environmental storytelling which made Half-Life 2, yeah. One thing that is kind of missing from Episode 1 is the environmental storytelling which made Half-Life 2's world much more believable and alive. It isn't completely absent, there are a few examples like this bike stuck on this pole. Someone probably was just having a nice ride on their bike before the Combine put a knife through that idea and ruined the person's day. Or this cool part in an elevator where you see multiple floors of infestations and it feels like you're rising from the ninth circle of hell. Or even some of the dead bodies in the hospital. It does flesh out the world a bit more, but there isn't really enough of it in my opinion. Anyway, after the fight in the hospital, there is a cool chopper fight, and then more shootouts and some puzzles. A camera then notices Gordon and Alex, and they meet up with Barney, and the second to final part of the expansion is helping these Resistance members get to the train station, which I've heard some people complain about, but I actually quite enjoyed this section. I think it may be due to the back and forth nature that some people might not like it. After that, Barney boards the train and leaves, heading off. Gordon and Alex are not far behind, but unfortunately a Strider comes in and attacks the train station, meaning Gordon has to fight it off, which is the only Strider in the episode. Afterwards, Alex and Gordon get on the train and leave City 17. The Citadel then starts to explode with these pods from before flying out, and the Citadel sends out a transmission of sorts, and then the episode ends. Overall, episode 1 is okay. It has some fun gameplay moments, and it's nice to see all the characters back and to spend more time with Alex, but nothing really much happens in terms of story, and the game just gets repetitive a lot of the time. There is still more to love than hate about the episode, but out of all the expansions for the Half-Life games, I definitely say it's the weakest. Hopefully episode 2 is better. Alright, so after a year of waiting, we finally have another chapter in the Half-Life series, episode 2. It released just about a month or two ago, and so I was obviously going to talk about it, considering it's Half-Life. Episode 2 starts off on a train, like most of the Half-Life games do. It's unclear how much time has passed in between episode 1 and episode 2, but I'd say only a few hours at most, judging from the sunset in episode 1 and how it's clearly the early morning in episode 2. Alex then appears and uses the gravity gun to pull the door off the train, allowing you to get out. It's nice to see a friendly face right away to help ease the player into the situation, and Alex does show that she cares for Gordon. I'm not sure if Alex has actual feelings for Gordon, but there is clearly something going on there.
When I couldn't find you, I got... I know, I shouldn't have worried.
Like episode 1, Alex is with you most of the game, although not as much as episode 1. Gordon and Alex then head over to this cliff and see the Citadel, and a portal storm happens as the railway collapses. It's a technically impressive sequence, and it must have taken a lot of work to pull off. What is weird, speaking of technical stuff, is that episode 2 runs better on my computer than episode 1 does. I guess episode 2 is optimized better. Anyway, unlike episode 1, there isn't as much to establish here, so the game gets almost right into the gameplay. Which is good because the player is already aware of the situation, and their objective is clear, so there's no need to dwindle on it. The graphics have also improved from episode 1. In the developer commentary, it says that Alex's character model has more polygons, and the lighting has been improved, which is something I can tell, since this is the best Half-Life has ever looked. There is a bit of combat with antlions and zombies, and it's fun. I also like how the explosive barrels have changed to propane tanks. They serve the same purpose, but I do like how Valve automatically makes the setting feel different by having your traditional weapons with the gravity gun have a different appearance. It's a small detail, but it goes a long way. It's also fun to have a bit of monster infighting with the antlions and zombies, fighting over each other with Alex and Gordon in the middle of it. It isn't the traditional one side versus the other, so the variety is appreciated. Alex and Gordon then need to establish contact with White Forest Base, so they need to figure out some shit with some wires, which includes this funny moment of Alex taking credit for your work.
Hey, if you have any blinding insights into how to fix this, go for it. Not sure what I did, but it worked.
Anyway, they establish contact with White Forest, and some information is given out on what is going on with the Citadel.
It's the Combine. They're trying to open another gateway.
Yes, what you're seeing is the infancy of a super portal. If it attains full strength,
It'll be the 7-hour war all over again. Except this time we won't last 7 minutes.
My God. Gordon, what if that's why they were sending so much data from the Citadel?
So yeah, after the destruction of the Citadel, the Combine are going to start another huge-ass war, and we have to stop them using the code we got from the Citadel. I also do like the subtle characterization with Dr. Magnuson here, and how Alex shakes her head at his own narcissism.
What you have there, young lady, is the specific contact code for the Combine overworld.
Good God.
If I am right about this, and I have no reason to doubt myself, you are carrying the very code Dr. Mossman had hoped to recover.
As said in the Half-Life 2 video, the body language of a character is important. This helps establish Dr. Magnuson's personality, and builds him up as an arsehole. The signal then cuts out and Alex and Gordon continue. Gordon heads inside a structure to open a gate outside as a hunter stalks them and then attacks Alex.
Oh my God! Ah!
genuinely shocked me the first time. I legit thought she was dead. Fortunately though, a Vortigaunt comes to our rescue and helps out Alex. But unfortunately, Gordon falls down an elevator shaft and has to make his own way through the mines. Since there isn't that much story in between, I'll get into the gameplay now. Once again, the gameplay is pretty much the same, but that's to be expected. It is an expansion, after all, not a new game. In terms of new enemies, there is the Antlion Worker, which is just a regular antlion, but it spits acid at you. Fighting it is pretty similar to the normal antlions, but due to the level design in the caves having more ravines and gaps in between pathways, they do truly take advantage of this new ability, and it does shake up the gameplay a little bit. The Hunter is a really fun enemy to fight. It's tough as balls to take down, but it's not unfair. The Hunter has an attack where it runs into you and thus slamming you back like 10 meters, and it also shoots these explosive dart things, which you can use against it by using the gravity gun to have the explosive darts be thrown back in the Hunter's face. It's a great addition, and it's cool to fight them alongside Alex. There aren't any new weapons apart from the Magnuson device, which destroys the Striders, but that's fine. Episode 2 has a lot more variety than Episode 1 does. It includes more platforming segments, some minor puzzles, and some cool story sequences, which help break up the tedium of the gunfights. There are also a few sections where you have to defend your position, and these are fun too. Which is cool, because I usually hate these types of sections in video games. My favourite being the holdout against the antlions. You have 2 turrets, which you have to strategically place next to certain pathways to stop antlions coming through. There are also hoppers to help you along the way, although this section does start to get more tense as the turrets start to go bust and you start running out of hoppers. The 2 rebels then notice the fact that there are 3 lights indicating a huge swarm of antlions, and at this point everyone thinks we're fucked, but then, out of nowhere, Vortigaunts come down and help take out a swarm of antlions. Not only is this section extremely fun, the music by Kelly Bailey, Vortal Combat, really adds to the excitement. There is a lot of combat with Combine, and while the shooter mechanics still aren't all that great, these sections have some great level design, with multiple routes for the enemy to flank, but also multiple ways for the player to traverse the level, and by the time you start fighting the Combine, you already have most of the weapons in the game, so you are free to take them out in pretty much any way you want. There are a few drive-in segments and chase sequences as well, as some minor boss fights, yeah. There are also a few drive-in segments and chase sequences, as well as some minor bosses, and these are all fun too. The issue I'm having with talking about the gameplay here, and the same issue I had with Episode 1, is that while the expansions do add some new stuff to the gameplay, they are still mostly the same as Half-Life 2 gameplay-wise, which isn't a bad thing, but it does make it harder to talk about, since I've already discussed the core mechanics of the game. So, yeah. Sorry if I don't have much to say here. Episode 2 is overall great in the gameplay department, and I might even go as far to say that it has the best gameplay in the series. But since there isn't anything massive in terms of new content, I don't have much material to work with here. Anyway, getting back onto the story, after Alex is injured, the Vortigaunts take her to a somewhat rebel outpost in the mines, and the characters need to hold out until more Vorts arrive. The Vorts do say that the only way to save Alex is to retrieve the extract from the Antlion Guardian. Now you can't kill it, as it will ruin the extract, so you have to run away from it. It's a fun switch-up from the regular gameplay. Anyway, the Vortigaunt then helps Gordon get the extract, and they head back to Alex as she is just about to die, as the Vortigaunts perform this ritualistic act on Alex, but it then gets interrupted.
Dr. Freeman. I realize this moment may not be the most convenient for a heart-to-heart, but I had to wait until your friends were otherwise occupied.
Ugh, just the way he says some stuff sometimes is creepy. I actually would like to compliment how the facial animations have improved since the 2004 game. This actually looks like a film. This is one of the few cutscenes in the game, and it's a damn good one at that. The G-Man is very cryptic, but you can interpret a lot from what he says, and the way he provides some backstory on Alex, and hints towards his employers.
When I plucked her from Black Mesa, I acted in the face of objections that she was a mere child and of no practical use to anyone. I have learned to ignore such naysayers when quelling them was out of the question.
There are so many things I love about this scene. The music has a deafening but quiet quality, just like G-Man, and how he stalks you throughout the game in a subtle but eerie manner. The cold temperature lighting just really gives you that chilling feeling that the G-Man gives, and the cinematography and voice work by Mike Shapiro, just perfect.
Now, listen carefully, my dear. When you see your father, relay these words. Prepare for unforeseen consequences.
Anyway, the Vodagants have sort of bonded Alex's and Gordon's lives. I'm not entirely sure what they mean by that, but it's kind of cute, I guess.
Go safely. Travel well.
Good luck out there. Okay, Freeman. Be adequate.
What the hell does that mean, anyway?
I don't know. Sounds like something the Vorts would say.
I do like that even though Half-Life 2 takes itself seriously, it still has moments of levity, especially Episode 2, which has the most comedy out of any Half-Life game. Anyway, Alex, Gordon, and the Vortigaunt then get to the surface level to find a bunch of Combine troops heading to White Forest. As they continue, they get into a battle with the Guardian and Antlions, and this is one of the most open areas in the game, and have a bunch of gravity gun opportunities. It's a very fun segment overall. Anyway, after another elevator trip, the group finds dead Combine and Rebel forces, but they are in luck as they see a car across the bridge they can use. Only Gordon can make it across, however, as he has the HEV suit and the area below is toxic. Fortunately enough, Alex does still provide help with a Combine sniper, and there is this fun warehouse segment where you have to shoot parts of the roof off to let her kill the zombies. It's some nice additions to this section, and it keeps the game fresh. Gordon then does make it to the bridge, but there is another portal storm which makes it collapse, and so Gordon has to pile up a bunch of cars on one side to make the weight shift like a seesaw, I guess. After all of that, Gordon finally makes it back to Alex and the Vortigaunt, and I just love Alex's excitement here.
Oh my god. Look at this car. We scored. Shotgun! Oh, unless you want it.
I like these type of moments because it just reinforces Alex's charm and attitude, which is interesting to see considering that the Combine invaded when she was just like 6 years old. So to have her be so optimistic and joyful despite having to deal with the Combine growing up is an interesting take, especially when other characters have clearly had their entire optimism robbed of them. She even gives the Vortigaunt a kiss on the head here, which annoys me because I don't remember Alex giving me a kiss. God damn it. Anyway, Alex and Gordon do make it to another tower to try and contact White Forest, but the signal is cut off by an advisor. There is also a fight here with hunters, which is awesome, and I like how determined Alex is to beat them this time.
They're not gonna catch me out.
Alex and Gordon then do continue to a barn with an unhatched Combine advisor, and they try to kill it, but accidentally set it loose. I really do like the look of the advisors, and how you get how powerful they are just from this introduction here. They have telekinetic and telepathic abilities, and they can crush barrels and human bodies like paper. It looks like it's curtains for Gordon, but then the hatch blows up, damaging the advisor, showing that they are extremely powerful, but it also reassures the player that they can be beaten, because as Dutch from Predator said, if it bleeds, we can kill it. This whole sequence with the roof of the barn coming apart and flying around is just really impressive, and it probably took a while to do so congrats to Valve on that. Anyway, there is then a shootout with Combine forces, and then there is a chase sequence with a helicopter dropping bombs on you, and just overall this entire sequence is a really huge adrenaline rush. Boy, I can't speak today. There is a fun boss fight with the helicopter, and then this sequence where you have to take out an autogun while staying below the cars. It's a nice change of pace, and I like how Half-Life 2 can go from bombastic action sequences to slower, more methodical gameplay sections, and yet it all blends quite nicely. And I do like the atmosphere as well, as since you have to duck below the cars to take cover from the autogun, it kind of feels like you're in the trenches of World War I. It's really cool. Gordon then takes it out, and they get back on the road with a small upgrade made to the car, a radar which detects ammo caches. These are completely optional, but do allow you to get more weapons and ammo, and they are fun to do. Like this one, where you have to launch yourself onto the platform to unlock the gate. The game shows you what to do instead of telling you. You can see a flap that can be opened as you see scorch marks under it, as well as a body in the top, saying that you have to grenade yourself up, and you get a rocket launcher afterwards, so it's worth it. Not much story happens for a bit. There's a couple shootouts and an area where Combine trap you and you have to hold your position, and these are all fun. Now, since I've been praising the game and its story so much, I think it's fair to bring up a criticism I have with it. That being that some sections are just pure filler and don't add much to the story. Like I said, the shootouts are fun, especially this one in a house, but it adds nothing to the story, and could have been cut without any repercussions. What I'm saying is that because some sections are just filler, it isn't as easy to stay invested in the story because some sections just pad the runtime, which isn't good. Anyway, after more driving, we finally reach White Forest as a Strider then comes in to kill Alex and Gordon, but then we have this really cool and very well choreographed fight between Dog and the Strider, and Dog rips out the Strider's brain afterwards, which is interesting because it means that the Strider is an actual organism, not a robot. Is it a cyborg? I don't know. There is then this cool race between Dog and Gordon as they finally arrive and meet Eli.
I knew if you both stayed together, you could get through anything.
Yeah? We make a pretty good team.
Yeah, well, that's good, because, well, now that the suppression field's down, we all have to do our part.
Dad?
Can you blame an old man for wanting grandkids?
It's nice to have a break from all the shooting and fighting and develop the characters and story. So the current plan is to launch the code from the Citadel into a rocket into the portal to close it. We then meet Dr. Magnuson, who is the funniest motherfucker ever. He constantly whines at Gordon and is a dick to pretty much everyone in the facility. I mean, he's meant to be that really annoying character, but he's done in such a comedic way that it just makes the game funnier. There is then a breach in the facility and Gordon has to close the blast doors, which is another filler section. Look, it's not as if these sections aren't fun, but it just slows down the pace of the story. Afterwards, we catch up on the group watching the video from Mossman before then discovering another video.
There's something else here. It's the Borealis.
Good God.
Incredible.
What? The Borealis? It's real?
Oh yes, quite real, despite its almost legendary stature. Our peers at Aperture Science were at work on a project of some promise, but in their rush to beat Black Mesa for funding, they must have compromised ordinary standards of risk. We heard their research vessel had simply disappeared, vanished, with all hands, and even part of the dry dock.
Now this is actually pretty awesome as it ties itself to Portal, Valve's new game on the Orange Box. It's cool to see references made in both games. Plus, Portal is a damn masterpiece and should be played by everyone. In fact, I may even like it more than Half-Life. Anyway, after learning about the teleportation device that the Borealis has, or is, there is a discussion made on whether it should be used against the Combine or be destroyed before it falls into the wrong hands.
It should have been lost forever.
Ah, but now that we've found it, we can use it against the Combine.
Did you use it? That thing has to be destroyed.
But think of the advantage for humanity. We can't simply waste all that potential.
Has Black Mesa taught you anything? There's no controlling that kind of power.
Well, yes. There's always a risk, Eli. But my goodness, we have coordinates, blueprints, hailing frequencies. Quite ingenious of Dr. Mossman to hide it all in the carrier wave.
Well, that means she's still alive up there.
This is some genuinely well-written conflict, and both sides have good and bad points. Who knows what the right answer is? We then get the Chekhov's gun build-up from earlier.
Dad, prepare for unforeseen consequences.
What did you say?
Dad!
Which, for the two people who don't get it, it's a reference to the chapter in Half-Life 1, Unforeseen Consequences, which happens right after the Resonance Cascade. Eli is visibly shook by this and nearly collapses, showing possible signs of PTSD.
Unforeseen consequences. The last time I heard those words was back at Black Mesa. You had just stepped into the test chamber when he whispered them in my ear. You know who I'm talking about. Our mutual friend. When he brought in that crystal, I knew I should have aborted that damn test, but I didn't. The whole world went to hell that day. And now he's using my little girl, putting words in her mouth. God damn it.
This is also another interesting scene, as it establishes that Gordon isn't the only major character in the series to have a conflict with the G-Man. It makes you think how much influence the G-Man might have on the world and the people around you. Anyway, we then get to the final segment of the game, where Gordon has to stop Striders from reaching the rocket, as even one of them could take it out. Just before then, Magnuson shows Gordon the new Magnuson device.
We call it the Magnuson device. Not my chosen label, you understand, but it seemed to please the personnel.
Yes, I'm sure it was the people at the facility that chose that name. Anyway, there is a little bit of practice so you can get used to how they work, and then Magnuson makes a reference to Half-Life 1.
If you pull this off, I might just forgive you for that debacle at Black Mesa. You know the one I mean, involving a certain microwave casserole.
My God, what are you doing?
And then the final fight begins. Now, this is the only section of gameplay in Episode 2 I don't like. The constant running around and having to deal with like 3 hunters before you can get a clean shot at the Strider is just annoying. Luckily you do have a Magnuson Luckily you do have a Magnuson carrier on the car, and the radar is updated to show you where the Striders are. And you also have this thing to tell you where your car is, but I just think there is an overabundance of enemies, especially hunters, on this level. It's just a very meh way to end the gameplay section of Episode 2. Afterwards, Gordon and Alex then meet up with Magnuson as he congratulates Freeman. We then get to witness the rocket launch, and Magnuson is a bit too excited.
We did it!
We sure did.
I can't control myself.
Yes!
Fantastic.
Deep breath. Deep breath.
Gordon, Alex, and Eli then head outside to see the show, while Kleiner stays inside to steal the rocket. Before then, there is a little talk with Eli.
Gordon, thanks for everything you've done. For Alex, for all of us. I couldn't be prouder if you were my own son. Now when you get back, we've got a lot to talk about.
Which is a nice scene, but does make the ending a bit more predictable, because why would they build this scene up if something bad wasn't going to happen right afterwards? Anyway, the portal is then closed, so the Combine can no longer get help from their world, meaning there is now a finite amount of Combine left. Gordon and Alex then have a clear goal in mind, get into the Antarctic and finding the Borealis. Just as Gordon and Alex are about to leave in the helicopter, 2 advisors come in and immobilize them as Eli is then killed.
Oh my God!
I love you, sweetheart. Close your eyes, honey.
I love you, Dad.
Don't look.
No! Oh my God! No! No!
Dog comes in and stops the advisors from killing Alex and Gordon, and they are forced to run away as Alex cries.
Oh God! Dad! Dad! Dad, please! Dad! Oh my God! No! No! Oh my God! Dad! No! Don't leave me!
I have to give massive props to both Robert Guillemine and Merle Dandridge for their performances in this scene, especially Dandridge for her very convincing sorrow at the end. This scene wouldn't work if both actors weren't trying their hardest, period. Episode 2 then ends. Overall, Episode 2 is probably the best entry in the entire Half-Life series, with the most polished gameplay and the most interesting combat encounters. The story is really well written, with a lot of emotion and conflict, implemented extremely well, even if there is a lot of filler. And the music is probably the best in the entire series as well. Overall, Episode 2 is a fucking brilliant entry and is definitely worth playing. I can't wait to see what's next in Episode 3. Well, that didn't go so well, did it? It's now the 16th of November 2019, and Half-Life 2 Episode 3 is nowhere to be seen. I mean, since Episode 2, we've had some awesome Valve games like Left 4 Dead 1 and 2 and Portal 2, but Episode 3 is non-existent. Now, ever since 2007, there has been a lot of information released about Valve, so much to the point that an entire documentary could be made just talking about how much Valve has changed over the past 12 years, so I'll just cover the basics. Half-Life 2 Episode 3 was supposed to have been released by Christmas 2007, which obviously didn't happen. There was also a Half-Life 2 Episode 4 being developed by Arcane Studios, the developers behind games like Dishonored and Prey. Episode 4 was going to be set in Ravenholm and was going to be a survival horror experience like the chapter in Half-Life 2. Valve was also working on a game with Arcane named The Crossing, but it was cancelled. Gabe Newell also said in 2006 that Half-Life 3 Episode 1 would have been a better name than Half-Life 2 Episode 1, so in a way the episodes were meant to be a Half-Life 3. Valve saw episodic gaming as the future for video games, and all 3 episodes were meant to add up to one big game. Instead of having to wait 5 years for the next Half-Life, a third of the game could be played sooner. Anyway, Valve then releases Left 4 Dead 1 and 2 and Portal 2, and they're all big successes both critically and financially. There were rumours that Portal 2 would be Valve's last single-player game, to which they denied, but as of 2019, Portal 2 is Valve's last single-player game. Valve nowadays doesn't really seem very interested in making video games anymore, let alone single-player games. They've decided to take on the more profitable option of just updating their games and selling other people's games on Steam. Since Valve has been at the top of the PC gaming market for years now with Steam, although the Epic Games Store has now given Steam a run for its money, pretty much every PC gamer buys most of their games from Steam, and Valve makes 30% of the game's profits on Steam. It is estimated that in 2016, Valve made over $800 million just from selling other people's games on Steam. That doesn't even take into account other factors which make them more money, such as their own games. The Half-Life series has estimated to have made over $1.6 billion total, which, while really good for a video game series, I can definitely see why Valve has taken this approach. Half-Life 2 was in development for 5 years and had a budget of $40 million, making it one of the most expensive video games at the time. And if you're a Half-Life fan, then you'll know about Half-Life 2's troubled development cycle and how much the game changed. Now, Half-Life 2 did sell over 12 million copies, which is insanely good, but why would Valve spend X number of years and X amount of money making another Half-Life game when they could make more money in a year or two with very little risks being taken? Even if Half-Life 3 was to come out and sell like 15 million copies, that would equal around $900 million in revenue, which, while a big number, Valve could make almost as much, if not more, in just a year from selling other people's games. Plus, you have to remember that Valve is a billion-dollar company, and they make billions each year. So while $900 million would be nice, it isn't needed for Valve to stay afloat. Basically, there is no financial reason for Valve to make Half-Life 3, especially when the hype for Half-Life 3 would be too big for Valve to live up to, and so they would end up releasing a disappointing sequel anyway. So it makes sense for Valve to choose this business where you can make billions and disappoint nobody. Now, that alone would be enough reason for Valve to not want to make Half-Life 3, but there is also another reason. Valve has an interesting way of work, where those who work at Valve get to choose what they work on. Valve does this because they think having a manager tell you what to do limits your creativity, and so Valve allows you to do pretty much whatever you want. And so you can literally move your desk from one office to another office in Valve to work on a separate project, which allows for a bunch of creative freedom but can also damage certain projects in the way this is handled. Now, you're probably thinking, well, wouldn't there be a shit ton of people at Valve who want to make Half-Life 3? Well, there is, or was. According to multiple sources, there have been many iterations of Half-Life 2 Episode 3, or Half-Life 3, and some of these did get up to over 40 people working on it. The issue, however, is that they kept hitting a dead end, and each time an iteration of Half-Life 3 got shut down, it became much harder for the next one to start up. The last known time Half-Life 3 was in development was 2014. Every once in a while, a few of Valve's files get leaked, and people discovered Half-Life 3 development files from 2014. It seems as if the people at Valve were initially interested in Half-Life 3 but lost excitement for the project after so many dead ends. So in other words, Valve has no financial reason to make Half-Life 3, and they've lost enthusiasm for it after hitting so many dead ends in development. Mark Laidlaw, the writer for the Half-Life games, also wanted to finish the story, and in a way he sort of did. On the 25th of August 2017, nearly 10 years after Episode 2, Mr. Laidlaw released Epistle 3, which was his story idea for Episode 3. Weirdly though, the names and genders of the characters have been changed. For example, Gordon Freeman was Gertie Fremont. I assume this was done so the work could pass as fanfiction, and thus Laidlaw wouldn't get in trouble with Valve. Though the Half-Life community did take Epistle 3 and correct it so that it has the characters and all the correct names and gender pronouns, I'll leave a link in the description if you want to read it. I won't spoil it for you if you haven't read it already, but I think it would have been a pretty awesome ending to the story. Should also be mentioned that Mark Laidlaw left Valve in January 2016. I think Laidlaw saw that Half-Life 3 wasn't going to be made, and so he did the best he could and provided as much closure as he could offer. What interests me the most about Epistle 3 though is the last paragraph and how much of it can be interpreted as Laidlaw's commentary on Valve and the Half-Life community. Quote, "It has been a circuitous path to lands I once knew, and surprising to see how much the terrain has changed," unquote, which can be interpreted for how Valve has changed over the years. Quote, "Old friends have been silenced or fallen by the wayside. I no longer know or recognize most of the members of the research team, though I believe the spirit of the rebellion still persists," unquote, which can reference how a lot of the developers of the Half-Life games have left Valve, and how much the team at Valve is very different from back in the Half-Life days. I also think the rebellion represents the Half-Life community here, when he says that the spirit still persists. Quote, "I expect you know better than I the appropriate course of action, and I leave you to it. Expect no further correspondence from me regarding these matters. This is my final episode," unquote. And afterwards, people create a bunch of Half-Life 3 fan games based on Epistle 3, some of which are still in development, such as Project Borealis. Project Borealis, I can't speak. Why can I never speak when I ever do these fucking videos? Yeah, Project Borealis, by the way, is a very interesting project. I would highly recommend checking it out if you're a fan of the Half-Life games. So, yeah, he's right. Laidlaw has left it to us. He gave us the story, and now we're the ones to finish the Half-Life saga how we see fit. I honestly cannot thank Mr. Laidlaw enough for posting Epistle 3. It's finally nice to be at peace with the Half-Life franchise, and it's nice to see that the Half-Life community is still sparkling. The Half-Life community has kept the game alive through many different works, such as mods for the games, such as Sven Co-op for Half-Life 1, which allows you to play with friends with the original Half-Life campaign, as well as through other mods. A similar mod was made for Half-Life 2, and it's really awesome to play with friends, even if it can mess up the levels a bit because they're not designed for 16 people. There are some mods which become their own games, like the Stanley Parable, which was originally a Half-Life 2 mod before getting a retail release in 2013, or even a game like Cry of Fear, which is a survival horror game. There are also mods like Entropy Zero, which flip the perspective of the story to a civil protection unit telling their own story and expanding upon the Half-Life universe. I love these type of mods, it just develops the universe a bit more even if they're not necessarily canon. Heck, there is even a mod Black Mesa, which is a complete recreation of Half-Life 1. The game is in early access as of right now, with the Zen chapters still unfinished, but the work is still very impressive, especially when you consider this recreation has been in development for longer than the original game. I'm not the biggest fan of it myself, but I still have to give credit where credit is due. One of the most interesting mods for me is Minerva Metastasis, developed by Adam Foster. The mod was so good that Valve actually hired Adam, and now he works at Valve. So that's nice. So the modding scene for Half-Life 1 and 2 has not only given people thousands of hours of entertainment, but it has also given jobs to many people and changed their lives. There are too many mods to go through, but they all add value to the games. There are also some awesome pieces of fan art, like these ones that you see here. I mean, having fan art for, a video game series isn't necessarily new, but it still has value either way. And as said earlier, there are plenty of fan games based on the Half-Life universe, some of which inspired by Epistle 3, and these all have their own unique ideas and some very interesting gameplay ideas. I just said ideas twice, I'm a fucking idiot. There are also plenty of cosplays and, the usual stuff. It's almost as if Valve has handed the creative rights of the Half-Life franchise over to the fans. It's as if Half-Life fans now own the franchise and take it in whatever direction they want, and can do whatever they want with it. And it's amazing how influential Half-Life 2 is that elements of it are still living on today. I mean, Titanfall 1 and 2 both run on the Source engine. It's honestly crazy to think that all three games are on the same engine. That just blows my mind. Heck, Borderlands 3, which released recently, as of the making of this video, has a laser-guided rocket called the Booster Freeman, or the Boosted Freeman. A 2019 game is referenced in Half-Life 2. Look how many games after Half-Life 2 tried to have their own version of the gravity gun or just mechanics similar to it. Look how many games have made a big deal of their physics because of Half-Life 2. Look at fucking Gary's mod. Half-Life 2 is still the 10th best-selling PC video game of all time, Half-Life 1 being the 11th. You know how many PC games get released each year, let alone 15 years? Yet Half-Life 2, 15 years later, is still in the top 10, with Half-Life 1 sitting just outside it. With Half-Life 2 selling 12 million copies, that means it outsold every Halo game except for Halo 3. The Half-Life series has outsold the BioShock series, the Ghost Recon series, the Spyro games, every Batman game, Mass Effect, Age of Empires, and fucking StarCraft. That's how big this franchise is, or at least was, back in the day. It's crazy. And to me, this just shows how much meaning video games have in pop culture. This isn't a unique thing just to Half-Life, obviously, but it's lovely to see so many people united and passionate about a video game series, to the point where they take the franchise into their own hands and make it their own. Like, seriously, the only reason why the Half-Life franchise is still so popular despite not having an entry since 2007 is because the fans just won't let it die. Now obviously everything that has a beginning has an end, and no piece of pop culture stays popular forever, but I don't think Half-Life will be fading away anytime soon. It's one of the many reasons I consider video games to be works of art. The fact that fans can carry a franchise long after the series itself has ended, just through sheer passion and love for it. While I would love for Valve to make Half-Life 3, in a way, something positive came out of them not making it. The fanbase for Half-Life grew due to the third game being the most anticipated video game of all time, and even though we never got it, those people still stuck around. The Half-Life games get new players each year. Take this with a pinch of salt, but I remember reading somewhere that the Half-Life games still sell like 1 million copies each year. 15 to 20 years later, loads of people are still playing these games. I think Racevic said it best in his video on the Orange Box. Half-Life 2 Episode 2 was a 5-hour expansion to a 3-year-old game, yet it was the most talked about game for 10 years. The fact that so many people still want to see an actual ending to the series shows how much these games touch people on an emotional level. And this is what I miss about Valve. When they were making games, they were making some of the best out there. And I miss those times. Because everyone working on these games were highly passionate and inspired artists who wanted to see their vision through to the end. Like I said before, Half-Life 2's development was a flimsy one, with constant changes in the story, gameplay, and overall structure, as well as the 2003 leak. Valve could have easily cancelled Half-Life 2 after that leak and it would have been disappointing, but reasonable. They didn't though. They pushed through, and now look at where Half-Life 2 stands in the video game industry. Every great artist will do whatever it takes to make their dream come true, even if it is a painful process. In fact, every work of art can be viewed as a representation of the pain the artist went through to make it. When a video game is able to connect you on so many different levels, excitement, terror, sadness, nostalgia, satisfaction, then I think it's hard to say video games aren't works of art. In my eyes, Half-Life is like one of the best examples out there for video games being art. Video games can shape who you are as a person. I mean, they've definitely shaped me. I wouldn't be who I am today without them. And to me, that's pure gold. It's just truly magical, the effect they can have on you. And I think one of the biggest examples of a video game that has shaped me is Half-Life. So while we will never see Half-Life 3 get made, it does put a smile on my face that the series will live on for quite a while longer because of its fans. I just wish Valve would realize they wouldn't be who they are today without a little bit of help from a 1998 video game. Now, before I announced the Half-Life 2 video on the 25th of October, I decided to leave a hint as to what the video would be, and those who found it out would get featured in the video as a shout-out. So, a shout-out goes to Cameron Douglas, at Electra Phoenix, at Razzie MP, at OWJ Casual, at Bullet Time Tales, and at Ross Graham. All 6 of these people figured out the Morse code before I announced the video, and thus I wanted to give a shout out to them, so congratulations. By the way, for those who didn't get the Morse code, what it translated to was the 16th of November, 2004, the release day of Half-Life 2. Now for fun, I decided to bring on some of my friends like Henry Badger, Grunt 4500, Gordonzora, Baggy Spartan 117, and MVL Gaming to talk about Half-Life 2. Enjoy!
Yeah, I did. I played a little bit of it. I didn't finish it before Half-Life 2. I played about half of Half-Life 1, and then shortly after I played Half-Life 2, and then I went back and beat all the original Half-Life games.
I actually didn't. Half-Life 2 was my first experience to the series, and I was actually introduced to it from my dad, which is pretty cool.
Yes, I actually did. Because I've heard about Half-Life because of the orange box, but I never played it because I wasn't allowed to. I was only allowed to play Portal. And so I was really interested in Half-Life, and I knew what it was. I just, couldn't play it until I think I was 13. I played Half-Life 1 just to see how it was, and I absolutely loved it. So that was just what I said.
I didn't play Half-Life 1 before Half-Life 2. In fact, I was Half-Life 2 by my dad since he had it on the original Xbox way back. And I never saw him play it, but I remember him owning it. And I remember looking on the back of the box and seeing the headcrab zombies. And I just thought that it looked really cool, but it looked kind of creepy, and he wouldn't let me play it. So I don't have what you may call Half-Life 2 memories. In fact, I didn't play Half-Life 2 roughly about, I'd say, 3 or 4 years ago now, and that's mainly because I managed to get it for the Xbox 360 via the orange box, and I just played it throughout the entire summer of 2015, I believe, and it was a really fun experience.
Absolutely loved Half-Life 1. Played it on PC originally, and that was one of the things that really got me excited. I pre-ordered Half-Life 2, and I don't often pre-order stuff because new games are expensive. I like to wait a little while, get them cheap. With a lot of systems, except maybe Nintendo stuff, because that stuff tends to keep its value, you can wait a little while, be a little patient, and then you'll get the games a lot cheaper. You maybe pick them up for a couple of pounds instead of today's prices, which are £50 or something for a game.
Oh boy, it was a while ago, and when I mean a while ago, I mean longer than I can remember. So my first impressions were probably one of the better games that I've played in my life. And this was when I was quite young, but the only games that I played around that time were kind of Halo and the usual that people would play during that time period when the game came out. So comparing it to a lot of other modern first-person shooters and such, it was certainly unique. So it was different. It was very different, and kind of caught me off guard in the way that the game was done and the way that you played the game and just the atmosphere and just everything. It was a very unique game, and it's kind of been solidified in my top 20 favorite games from that day on.
So I think I played Half-Life 2 around 2006, 2007.
All right.
And my initial reaction is that this is the scariest game I've ever played in my life. It still is probably the scariest game I play, but you know, when I was a little kid, just walking through the streets at the beginning, it's just the atmosphere in the game just freaked me out. So, and hearing whispers about Ravenholm the entire time from my dad, it just kept on freaking me out because I didn't know what Ravenholm meant until we got there. So it was a pretty freaky game, but I loved it.
I can understand that. I mean, Ravenholm is pretty scary.
Yeah.
Especially with all like the cries and screams you hear the whole time.
Dude, they'll still get to me today, I'll tell you what. That's some PTSD level stuff. Oh man. But yeah, as a kid, I mean it was definitely one of my favorite games to play at the time. I was obsessed with it when I first started playing it. So when I first beat it, you know, I was really lucky because the 2 episodes were already out, and Half-Life 1 I could still play too. So it was quite the experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like binge watching stuff on Netflix. Just it's nice to have it all there at once to experience.
Yeah, that's very true. Now, if only I started at the beginning of that Netflix series instead of, you know, season 2 or 3.
It's like starting like halfway through it, going back to the beginning.
Exactly. I'm like, who's this Barney guy?
Well, my first time playing Half-Life 2 was when I was like, I think I was like 13 or 14. And, you know, I said, you know, I loved Half-Life 2, but I have to say, you know, it was really great for its time, since it was 2004, which was like the same year as, like a bunch of games came out, like Halo 2, Spyro, Hero's Tale, and a bunch of other games. And the graphics for that time were like really mind-blowing. And I remember hearing people kept saying things on the internet like it looks like an actual photograph, and like, you know, many people were like really excited, and they were like, yo, this looks so fucking realistic, you know, way more better than any other games at that time. And when I saw the graphics, they were really great. And I noticed how in Half-Life 2 it was much more like storytelling instead of just run and gun and see what you can do.
I liked Half-Life 2. It's just I wasn't used to that type of game where you use the environment around you to get to the next location. It was definitely a complex game for me at that time. Over the course of me playing the game, I got a lot better. I understood the physics, I understood the weapons, and I understood the world around me and the characters.
When I got to playing the game, man, it was worth the wait. My PC wasn't the best. I had frame rate issues, which is one of the reasons I do tend to go to consoles now, because if you don't have the hardware, your PC might not be able to keep up with a game. And I enjoy a smooth gaming experience. I'm not completely obsessed with 1080p 60 FPS, but I do like to not notice, you know, staggering on the frame rate. But the game, my goodness, it was so good. I got hooked. These days, I rarely have time to play a game a long period of time, unless it's a game that really grabs me and says, play this game. Recently, Alan Wake was one of those experiences where I was like, whoa, okay, I got to put down everything and play Alan Wake. What have I been doing? How did I miss this game? I got to play Alan Wake. And certainly Half-Life 2 had that impression on me where I just dropped everything and I played the game and I enjoyed it.
Absolutely, especially during the time that the game came out. During that time, I was playing games like Halo 2. Pretty much, yeah. I was playing a lot of Halo 2 during that time when I was in school. So that was probably my main game at that time. So I would often compare first-person shooters and such like that to the current first-person shooter that I was playing. So the physics in Half-Life in general are just fantastic in comparison to a lot of games that came around that time. Really, it's something different, to be sure. And I wouldn't say it revolutionized physics in gaming, but I would certainly say games made by Valve with the Source engine, like Portal, Half-Life, that certainly did cause a major shift in the gaming industry in the sense of, of how games can be played. It really inspired a lot of creators. I really, if you look anywhere in the gaming industry, you're gonna find someone who said Half-Life 2 or Portal inspired them in one way or another. And I see Half-Life 2 and Portal as almost like sister and brother in a way. So, yeah. It's inspired a lot of creators, so I think it's definitely got an impact.
Yes, actually, I was actually really impressed by the physics, and I really love how the game just really takes a focus on that too at times. Those just physics puzzles. It's actually some of my favorites today. Yeah, I don't know. I think the physics in Half-Life 2 are just awesome.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, I loved how you could like shoot people and they just fall down like a rag doll. And then especially in Gary's mod, since it's a Half-Life 2 mod, you could basically just grab them with a fizz gun and just go flying everywhere. It's so funny.
The physics for the Source engine. So I'm not a guy who looked in depth on how games works when it comes to physics. I just play games to have fun. But there were a lot of comedic situations when it came to the physics, and I just thought that it was just completely wacky. Some of the physics just didn't really make sense, but I had fun with it. I liked throwing all the types of objects at people, and especially the Ravenholm section where you had to use the environment around you. That was definitely a highlight, and that definitely showed off the physics engine. So I say it was impressive despite some of the wacky scenarios that I came across.
Half-Life 2's gameplay, I would say it's aged well. Not as well as some other games, but it's certainly aged well, and it sparked a bunch of community creations, Gary's mod, and yeah, a bunch of other games, fan games, all kinds of sorts, and many games are inspired off of the sort of the template that the game set. Like, for instance, even a AAA title such as Overwatch, one of the main heroes, McCree, his main weapon was actually inspired by the Half-Life 2 pistol when they were making the character. So stuff like that, it's very, very influential. Definitely. There's a lot of games that are adopting the playstyle, tone, gameplay. Yeah, it's a very unique style of gameplay in comparison to many other first-person shooters in general. And I see a lot, especially nowadays, a lot of games being inspired by a lot of Valve's creations. So, yeah.
On the gameplay, at times it can be a little rough, especially during the intense firefights with the Combine. But overall, I think especially with the gravity gun, the gameplay is actually pretty fun. There's some areas you could use improvement, but when you're using the shotgun, the gravity gun, just some of the more heavier types, I actually had a lot of fun with it. The vehicle stuff was a little bit hard, especially on consoles. It's hard. I'm not a huge fan of the boat sequence, but I get through it, and the buggy sequence is actually pretty fun. But yeah, I mean that kind of wraps it up for me as far as the gameplay goes. I think it's overall pretty good with just a few hiccups here and there.
The gameplay is actually pretty good. Like, I didn't know how you could run or sprint until I just pressed shift. I'm like, oh, well, that's how you run. Because in Half-Life 1, you press shift, you walk. But in Half-Life 2, you press shift and you run. So the gameplay is just slightly different.
On the gameplay, so roughly, because I've mainly played games like Halo, Call of Duty, and all manner of types of different first-person shooters, and to me, I find the gameplay fun, but I do have a few issues with it. But yeah, I mean, it's a fun game. It's just again, I'm not someone who goes, in depth into this type of stuff. I just, play a game as it is, and if there's something that I really like, I'll point it out. I liked playing in the buggy. That was definitely something that was fun, although it kind of was a little bit hard to control, and something about the traction just feels wrong at first. But again, you'll gradually get used to it, and it's not really much of a bother to me. I do really like the boat sections, although I will have to admit that part of the game just goes on for way too long, in my opinion. There are, obviously there's the famous chase through the I guess the reservoir, if that's what it is, or something. Through the lake. That's all really fun, and that really cool section where you're getting chased by the Combine and they're throwing bombs at you. That's definitely a really cool section, and that's one of the memorable parts of the game for me.
Overall, I was very impressed. The only thing that might have detracted me at the time would probably have been the performance of my computer. But down the line, I played the orange box version on the Xbox 360, and other than using an Xbox 360 controller instead of a mouse and keyboard, it was a very good experience.
I think a lot of people say that the story... When a lot of people mention good story and good characters, a lot of people do mention Half-Life. Personally, I think it was fine. I think a lot of the characters were good and fine. Certainly weren't the best things I've ever seen. I'm gonna insult a lot of people by saying that, but I am being honest. I think it's great. It is one of the best games I've ever played, and the characters and story really do help influence that. I think one of the strongest things Half-Life has is tone and setting. So, the characters and the story really do play into that. So I feel like it is good. Very much so. The characters and story are quite good.
The story and characters, I think, are really well done, especially for such a linear game that only takes place from one perspective the entire time. That's also 15 years old. I think, there's not a huge focus on character development necessarily, but the characters they feature are both really good, charismatic as far as Alex goes, being your assistant, or I guess, and through some parts of the campaign. And as far as the story goes, I think it's a pretty good story. I don't have any issues with it. It's I think the kind of the lore behind it is even a little more interesting, but overall, I think the story works completely fine. And I think with the context of the other game and these, I guess technically the sequels, just the episodes, I think that improves it a lot. And I still think it's a story that holds up today very, very well.
Well, I thought the story was pretty interesting because there's like this Combine people. They're like taking over Earth or some shit like that, and I don't know. It's like a bit. It was kind of confusing, but then I understood the lore, and I was like, oh, so that's how all that happened. Because I wasn't into the lore back then, but then when I read it, I was like, oh, it makes sense now. And for the characters, all pretty good. It's funny how Barney is like disguised as a Metro cop, and Alex is like kind of annoying. But other than that, they're all pretty great.
The story isn't something that I mainly focused on. I just wanted to play this little game that everyone talked about, and see how I felt about it. And I do find the story quite interesting. There's a lot of ominous dread about it. There's this creepy atmosphere about it, especially all the things surrounding the G-Man and how the Combine work, and also the aliens as well. I like all the things surrounding them, and they're kind of fucked up handling, I guess, combat scenarios, especially with like the head crabs. I'm sure you are aware of the infamous, I guess, is it the backtrack audio of the infected zombie that's just screaming in agony, and it's the most disturbing pieces of audio I've ever heard. Story-wise, it's just not something that I remember personally. I remember the characters like Alex, the funny scientist guy, Barney, and Eli, and obviously the death of Eli. Rest in peace. It wasn't something I focused on. In my opinion, it was mainly the world, and G-Man is definitely one of the best parts of that section. Just the mystery surrounding him. You don't really find out who he is or where he came from. He's just this guy that is very mysterious. He's obviously some form of supernatural powers, but we just don't know what exactly. So I just really love that mystery about him, and I love the type of other vibe that they were trying to do with City 17. The checkpoints. And you can definitely tell that by all the people. They're scared of the Combine, and you see that the house is getting raided. So you really do get a sense of the situation that the people in, and that's another thing that Half-Life 2 executed really well. That the opening level or the opening, I guess, chapter of Half-Life is just one of the parts that I remember just mainly because of the design of City 17. Because it reminds me so much of Chernobyl.
Alright, so at the start of the game, I really like how it is a slow build and it gets you into there. And then they do introduce the characters nicely and slowly one at a time, so you don't get overwhelmed by the story. And certainly, especially moving back on the gameplay a little bit, you don't get overwhelmed by enemies all in one go. They build that up slowly as well. But I really like how the story developed. Of course, it has to develop in a way that is conducive to a video game, so they do have to keep upping the ante. Like, now you've got to go and be chased, now you've got to be trapped in a place, and now you've got to move along. But it didn't feel like you were being plodded along. It felt like you were developing a story that you really had to get from one place to another, and that you had to eventually put a stop to what was going on. But my favorite thing about the story is how it wasn't its own thing. It harked back to Half-Life 1 and made the events of that still matter in this story.
Oh, fantastic. I would say it's iconic to an extent. In to pass on the hidden exterior jokes, but I would say it's definitely unique. There's very few soundtracks that are similar, I would say. I can listen to the Half-Life soundtrack any time of day, and I will know instantly that it's from Half-Life. That's just kind of the way the soundtrack sounds.
The music is actually really interesting, because when I think of Half-Life 2, the last thing I think about is the music. But whenever I play through it and the music gets going, it's just, so good. Especially when you walk into a new area and it starts playing that really just kind of freaky music, but it kind of sets the tone. And then when you're getting those firefights, those big, I guess, movie moments, and that music is going, dude. Oh man, it's actually really, really just high energy. I think it's really good. I also think it's used in a very smart way where it's not constantly playing. In fact, I think probably about half of the game, if not more, doesn't have music. So when the music comes in, I think it just packs more of a punch.
Oh shit, okay, here we go. Alright, so the music, it's really great. I absolutely love the music, especially in Half-Life 1. Because a lot of fun fact is that Kelly Bailey, the composer of the music, used this it's a sample album that's called Methods of Mayhem or something like that.
And like Cuckoo Land?
Yeah, like, by 0G or something like that.
Yeah.
And he used like tons of samples to make music, and when I heard those samples, like, oh, that sounds like Half-Life. And I love how he took all those things and made it to his own kind of music, and it actually fits in with the game's its tone, and then its I'm not sure how you say it, like how the game is and stuff.
Yeah, the atmosphere, I guess.
Yeah, the atmosphere. There we go.
Yeah.
And it just sounds really cool. Like, I just love it. And same with Half-Life 2. So it's really nice.
The music is, I find it really good. Although there aren't anything that I particularly remember. It's, from what I gather and everything I have researched, is they use quite a few soundtracks from the first Half-Life, which I thought was cool.
I'm gonna do one second. I'm just gonna check that. They use around 7 tracks from the first Half-Life out of 41 songs.
And but one of the audio, or one of the pieces from the soundtrack was "Try It at Dawn," or "Try It at Dawn." I think that's what it was called. It was basically the song that played when a character called Winston got hit or something.
Yeah. Dun 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 dun. dun.
Yeah, that's a track that I really like, and it kind of symbolizes the overall situation that humanity is at. It's a kind of depressing feeling song, and you know you can kind of understand this really messed up situation that humanity is in, and I just really love the song to death. But one track that I really loved, and it is kind of a reuse of a song from Half-Life 1, and that's the closing music, but they kind of remixed it.
Yeah, it's a remix, track and device.
Track and device. Yeah, that's a highlight. I really love that.
I would say it served its purpose. I would compare it to a film soundtrack and not like an album. If you know, Vampire the Masquerade had a lot of music that was just band music, and although it fitted the theme, it was trying to be obvious that it's there. I would compare the music more to like a film soundtrack,
where it's like not meant to be noticeable, but it's meant to add to it.
Exactly.
Ah, all right.
Oh boy. I would say I don't know the names of them off the top of my head, other than the Ravenholm one. But I would say, yeah, we don't go to Ravenholm. But I would say Nova Prospect is one of my favorites.
That's actually the name of the chapter, so that works.
It is. There we go. Oh. Probably one of my favorites. It's very. It's one of the more unique ones in my opinion. Honestly, I like them all. Like when I play Half-Life 2, I never go, oh, I just want to play this one part. It's like I want to play the whole game. I want to play it from start to finish, because you can start the game out like the game is it's constantly changing, the game, but it still maintains the same tone and kind of gameplay cycle.
Ravenholm. Oh my gosh, Ravenholm, dude.
Yes.
I love Ravenholm to this day. So, yeah, my dad was having me play through it, but he wouldn't help me. He would just sit there and watch me try to figure out these puzzles and stuff as these zombies are just like invading you and stuff. I mean, just everything about that level is just designed so well to both keep you into it and afraid, but it's never like a slow burn afraid. It's just constant. So, oh my goodness. And plus, you know, using the gravity gun to, you know, pick up the saw blades and saw them in half. Never gets old.
My favorite chapter had to be the we can go to Nova Prospect with the ant lions. We have this squishy ball thing, you just throw them, they'll attack at the combine and all that stuff. And I also like how the music in the background is like this techno type of music.
Yeah.
Which made it like, you know, much more upbeat. And I was like, yeah, this is what I'm going for, you know.
Ravenholm, that is possibly one of the most memorable experiences I've had in games, especially when I played that, 4 or 5 years ago. I just love the horror vibe, the deserted, it's a deserted town that's clearly had, it's had the worst day possible, and I like the mystery surrounding it. I like how everyone talks about, don't go in Ravenholm. It's a dangerous place, but you kind of wonder what's so bad about it, and then you actually get to go into the town, and it's a shithole, and it's a really fun level, and I really like it. And I like the dude that you meet, and he just basically laughs maniacally throughout the entire level, but he helps you out at the same time.
Yeah.
Liked the I guess the new enemy types. It's the head crab zombies that can run really fast and they scream at you and everything like that. Those things are terrifying, but I loved fighting them, and that brought a lot of memories as well. So Ravenholm's a really, and I wish more games had stuff like that nowadays.
Well, it's probably going to be really obvious that from how I've spoken previously, my favorite part was the survival horror part, where you are locked off and then you're fighting the head crabs and the zombie-like creatures with the head crabs on their heads, and then the black head crabs, which can kill you. Or no, they put you to 1 health, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That whole section of the game was by far my favorite and the most memorable to me.
Ooh, geez. That's certainly a difficult question. I would say Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 are very different. In my opinion, they have some things that are similar, but I would say they are actually quite different games. They are related and they are similar in genre and just kind of how you play it and everything, but the setting, the type of enemy that you're fighting, tone, music, even weapons that you use, some of them are very different, such as that hive weapon. I forgot what it's called, but
the hive hand.
The hive hand, there we go, exactly. Yeah. I would say overall Half-Life 2 is an improvement, but there are some things that I've heard from people where they're like, oh, Half-Life 1 has this, but Half-Life 2 doesn't, or Half-Life 1 is more, of a run and gun kind of Quake style game, you can do all those things. I think overall I prefer Half-Life 2 over Half-Life 1, but Half-Life 1 does have some pretty amazing things, like the enemies. I would say some of the enemies are a lot cooler than Half-Life 2's enemies. Some of them, heavy emphasis on some. And yeah, some of the weapons, like the Gauss cannon, or Gauss cannon, as some people would say, that I know that's mounted on the vehicle in Half-Life 2, but you using it as a handheld weapon, that's definitely something interesting. Yeah. And that one, I forget what it's called, but the laser cannon, that kind of reminds me of a Ghostbusters.
Glue-on gun?
Yeah. That sort of thing. Half-Life 2 doesn't really have that, but I would say overall Half-Life 2 is an improvement, and I do prefer Half-Life 2. So, yeah.
I'm going to say yes to both, actually. And keep in mind, I played Half-Life 2 before Half-Life 1, so I didn't, have that, knowledge of Half-Life 1 and how it all worked before Half-Life 2. I like Half-Life 2 overall better. The gameplay feels more solid. Obviously, I think the storytelling's a little better. The last, area of the game is a lot better than Zen, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely.
I love the last bit of Half-Life 2, and I don't know, Zen was fine, but it wasn't, amazing.
It wasn't the worst thing ever, but it wasn't the best.
Exactly. It was just very average in a really, really good game. And I think as far as expanding the Half-Life universe, I think Half-Life 2 absolutely killed it there. More than most games do, actually. Because it just took everything that the first game did and applied and implicated as well with the 7-hour invasion or 7-hour war. And just bring into Half-Life 2 and just seeing what those events were that just happened in that base that you were in. how that kind of expanded to the whole world. That was really big for me, really interesting. I also think it's better just because I think there's a lot more varied sequences, I guess. Not that there weren't in Half-Life 1, but I just think, even though the vehicle gameplay is a little bit sloppy at times, I think those do add a breath of fresh air. I think the Combine add a lot to Half-Life 2 that I don't think was there as much in Half-Life 1, fighting the military soldiers. But yeah, overall, I like Half-Life 2 actually quite a bit more than Half-Life 1. That doesn't mean I don't like Half-Life 1, but yeah.
For Half-Life 1?
Yeah.
I say yes. And, I say yes because when the aliens first came to Earth and they're causing trouble and stuff, the scientists and they because of the Zen crystals, and so I think because of the Combine, they probably noticed that the humans were on Earth they were doing this stuff, so they're okay, maybe it's our chance to take over as well. And I guess it kind of made sense because when you first play the games, it won't make sense, but when you read the lore and stuff, then it starts to make much more sense.
It's a good question because I didn't play Half-Life 1 until I completed Half-Life 2, roughly around the same time I actually first played Half-Life 2. And I don't want to sound like, oh, it's an old game and it's clearly not able to be fantastic. Half-Life 1 is a fantastic game, but I don't think as good as Half-Life 2 because Half-Life 2 improved on so many different aspects from the first game. And just in my opinion, just from I find Half-Life 2 technically superior to the first one, and that's kind of no shit because it was made in 1998 or 7 years later. Oh, there you go. But I just find Half-Life 2 to be a much better experience than the first one, and there's a lot more involved in the second one than there is with the first one.
Okay, this is a really tough question because I'm often to the mind that a sequel needs to be really, really good to be better than the first game, because a sequel is meaningless without the context of the first entry. So I do really, really like Half-Life 1. And this is why this is quite unusual for me. I'm going to treat this in a kind of aliens type scenario where I pretty much consider them entirely different entities, because Alien, not to the extent of Alien and Aliens 2 where they changed the genre completely, but certainly the technology available at the time for Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 meant that Half-Life 2 could really jump the goal and set such a higher standard than what was even possible in the first game. The first game is absolutely amazing, I'm not taking anything away, but the fact that the second game can do so much, you can go through so many different areas and you can do so many different things that you couldn't do in the first game. Like you have those racing parts, you have that survival horror part, you have lots of physics on hand that you didn't have available in the first game. I am going to say that I did like Half-Life 2 better, but then that experience is molded by playing through Half-Life 1. So I did like the second one better, but of course if I played them in a different order, it may have been a different question.
All of them are great people, by the way, and you should go check them out. A link to their Twitter and YouTube will be in the description. In conclusion, what more can be said about Half-Life 2? It's one of the most critically acclaimed and loved video games of all time, and it's one of the most influential too, and same goes for the first Half-Life. If you call yourself a gamer, you need to play these games, even if it's just to see what all the fuss is about. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't, but one thing is certain, you'll be contributing to the game's success either way.
I'd say yeah, definitely. It's a damn good game. I don't think it's the best game on the planet ever. It's certainly one of the best games made, like, just in general. Like, it's a fantastic game. I think it deserves it. I think all the people on the team worked incredibly well, very hard. It's obviously a passion project. They really cared about what they were making. It's an interesting universe, interesting characters, music, voice actors, everything. It's just it is a fantastic game, and I think it does deserve the praise. They obviously worked very hard on it.
Yes, I do. I do think at times it's a little overdone, but overall, it's still a game that's talked about 15 years later. It's it blew everybody away back in 2004, and I still think people who play it today are going to be blown away for the first time. It's really a game that holds up in every single aspect, in my opinion, aside from a few gameplay things here and there. And I think everything about the game is almost flawless, in my opinion. It's just so good, and everybody talking about it still 15 years later with no Half-Life 3 is phenomenal. Very, very few games are able to get that kind of attention, and Half-Life 2 is still, I think, in many players, like, top 10 like FPS games lists. So yeah, I do think it deserves all of the acclaim it gets.
I'd say yeah. To be honest, I'd say yes because it was a really innovative game, since it was, like, I guess, quote unquote groundbreaking for its time. Because what I mentioned earlier, the graphics and the physics, and because another thing is that it also holds up till this very day. So I'd say it's a great game.
The time it came out, I do believe that the praise was warranted, but as over the years, it's kind of, some of the stuff is kind of a bit dated. But I still think the game is magnificent despite some of the more dated aspects. So I do believe everything that has been said about it is warranted.
Yeah, to me, Half-Life 2 was an absolutely amazing game. The things that it did at the time were unreal, and they've influenced games since it. So the game itself has had a massive impact on not just me, but every gamer out there at the time. And even you guys, if you're listening to this, you're listening to this because you love Half-Life 2. How can you say the game isn't amazing?
In the meantime, this is where I get off.